Chapter 31:53. The chaotic sky gradually calmed down. The previously bustling sky had now become incomparably cold and cheerless. Out of more than 1,010 people, only 10 or so were left. Furthermore, all of them were injured and covered in blood. They looked battered and exhausted. The stunned, golden-armored commander and silver-armored captains finally regained their senses and immediately cried out in horror. Terrifying. It's too terrifying. He only used one move and killed all of our warriors. How can there be such a ferocious and terrifying person in this world? What kind of strength does he have? Devil. He's simply a devil, the silver-armored captains exclaimed. Their voices were trembling in fear. The golden-armored commander's face was also very pale. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with despair. They watched as Ji Tianxing stepped across the sky and raised his right hand, about to use his divine power again. Everyone knew that if the next divine power descended, they would all die. At the moment of life and death, the golden-armored commander roared loudly. "Stop! You devil, are you crazy? I'm the commander of the Heavenly Wolf City Guards. The Heavenly Wolf Commandery Lord personally appointed me. I'm also the general that protects Heavenly Wolf City. Furthermore, I'm a noble conferred by the royal family. If you dare to kill me, you'll be making an enemy of the Heavenly Wolf Commandery. You have no regard for the law and publicly trampled on the laws of the Kingdom of Gods. You're making an enemy of the royal family and the Kingdom of Gods." The golden-armored commander spoke quickly. He had shouted so much in one breath, but he still felt that it was not enough. He continued shouting, "Kid, I advise you not to make a mistake. You killed more than 1,000 city guards and wanted to kill me. The Heavenly Wolf Commandery will definitely not let you off. The royal family will also do their best to encircle and annihilate you. If they don't punish you, where will the Kingdom of God's laws and the royal family's dignity be? Even if you have extraordinary means, you're alone. How can you fight against the entire Kingdom of Gods?" On the surface, it sounded like the golden-armored commander was persuading Ji Tianxing and using the Heavenly Wolf Commandery and the Kingdom of God's royal family to intimidate Ji Tianxing. But in reality, he only wanted to preserve his life. He now believed that the city lord had sent him on this mission to send him to his death as cannon fodder. However, Ji Tianxing remained unmoved and continued to approach the golden-armored commander. He said expressionlessly, "If you want to be cannon fodder, you should have the awareness of being cannon fodder. Since you've chosen to die, why should you regret it? If you do not die, the Skywolf City Lord will not achieve his goal. He will definitely be displeased. Therefore, it's better for you all to die." As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing waved his right hand and shot out dozens of dazzling golden sword lights that enveloped the golden armor commander, silver armor captain, and the others. Swish! Swish! A burst of dazzling sword light flashed. The golden-armored commander and the others didn't even have time to cry out before they were torn apart by the sword light. Blood rained down from the sky, and a few godheads flew out. They fled toward Heavenly Wolf City in a panic. Ji Tianxing waved his hand again, releasing more than 10 sword lights, shattering the divine deity. Dozens of shards of divinity fell from the sky. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed, and he put the godhead fragments into his interspatial ring. He didn't stay any longer. He took out the divine warship and entered it. Swish! The palm-sized divine warship immediately returned to its normal size and became 1,000 feet long. Left Emissary Jean and right Emissary Blood Dragon steered the divine warship and streaked across the sky, turning into a black beam of light that headed south. 300 miles away from the battlefield, there were 2 heavily injured city guards covered in blood. They were hiding in the forest and gasping for breath. They had been at the edge of the battlefield and were very lucky to have escaped death and survived. Just now, they had witnessed thousands of city guards being killed in an instant. The commander and captain had also been killed by Ji Tianxing. The two of them were scared out of their wits. They thought that Ji Tianxing would kill them all. They didn't expect Ji Tianxing to ignore them and fly away on the divine warship. Seeing the divine warship disappear into the horizon, the two of them heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Phew! Luckily, that guy didn't discover us. We managed to survive. That guy's extremely powerful. He killed thousands of people in an instant. How could he not discover us? He only treated us like ants and ignored us. That's right. What should we do now? Return to Sky Wolf City to report? Or escape? Return to the city, my ass. Didn't you hear what that kid said? The city lord knows who he is and deliberately sent us to our deaths. The commander and captain were all killed, and only the two of us were left. Who would believe that we were lucky enough to survive? If you dare to return to Sky Wolf City, I guarantee that you won't live to see tomorrow's sun. You're right. Let's not return to the city. Let's quickly leave this place. Anyway, everyone has been killed. The city lord will mistakenly think that we are dead and probably won't pursue the matter. After the two surviving city guards secretly discussed for a moment, they did not return to Celestial Wolf City. Instead, they fled without a trace. Inside the divine warship, in the conference hall, Lin Shui, Blood Illusion, Gold Left Emissary, Blood Dragon, White Dragon, and Zhenhong were all present. Everyone looked at Ji Tianxing, who was sitting at the head of the table, with concern and worry in their eyes. Lin Shui smiled and said, "You killed those city guards so quickly. I thought that you used that sword array again. I didn't expect that you would have so many powerful sword arts in addition to the sword array." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said indifferently, "They're just a bunch of ants. They won't take up too much of my time." Blood Illusion frowned and said worriedly, "Young master, although we all know that you are extremely powerful and are unrivaled in the entire Raging Flame Divine Kingdom, you should have left earlier. But you should have just left and not killed all the city guards." Gold Left Emissary also had the same idea. He nodded and said, "Young master, those city guards have different identities. They represent Sky Wolf City, Sky Wolf County, and the Divine Kingdom's royal family. In the wilderness, we fought with the people of the major sections. Even if we fought until the sky turned dark, the Raging Flame royal family could pretend not to know. But you killed more than 1,000 city guards like that. This will definitely shock the entire court. The entire Sky Wolf County and the Raging Flame royal family will do their best to encircle and annihilate us." The Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, and Zhenhong were also aware of this point and nodded in agreement. Only White Dragon and Lin Shui didn't care about it. "We already killed them. What's the point of saying this now? To my master, the Raging Flame royal family is nothing to fear. Didn't he kill the ruler of the Blood Flame Divine Kingdom before?" Blood Illusion immediately retorted, "But the situation is different now." Seeing this, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "You don't need to argue. I have my own plans. The royal family and Prince Lien know my whereabouts and purpose. The royal family didn't intervene before because Prince Lien still had a powerful force. But now that the 7 major sects are gone, Prince Lien's power is greatly reduced. I can only ask the royal family to take action. If the Raging Flame royal family wants to deal with me, they need a legitimate excuse." Thus, the Heavenly Wolf City Lord sent the city guards to their deaths. "In any case, I don't refuse anyone. Whoever wants to die, I'll satisfy them. The Raging Flame royal family is no exception." Chapter 3154. Raging Flame Royal City. In the same resplendent palace, in a secret room filled with divine power. Since last night, Prince Lien had not circulated his energy to treat his injuries. On the surface, he looked like he was resting in the divine liquid pool. In reality, he was waiting with some apprehension, unease, and anticipation. Although he was far away in Royal City, he was concerned about the situation in Celestial Wolf City. To him, the result of last night's battle was of utmost importance. The 7 major sects had attacked with hatred. More than 2,000 elite forces. Could they kill Tianxing? Prince Lien was not confident, not even 10% sure. He had a premonition that the elites of the 7 sects would most likely die under Ji Tianxing's sword. If that was the case, after the 7 sects were destroyed, Ji Tianxing would head south and head straight for Royal City. How would he deal with that? At the same time, he still had a sliver of hope. Dao Qinxiu, Luo Luxue, and the others were all high-ranked divine lords with rich battle experience. More than a dozen high-ranked divine lords, dozens of mid-ranked divine lords, and nearly 200 low-ranked divine lords. Such a powerful lineup should be able to kill Tianqing, right? Even a half-step divine king would have to die on the spot, let alone a peak divine lord of the 9th degree. When he thought of this, Prince Lien could not help but pray that the experts of the 7 sects would be able to kill Tianqing and make a great contribution. Under such a complicated state of mind, the night quickly passed. It was early morning. Prince Lien could not suppress the anticipation in his heart and open his eyes. He wanted to summon Lien Heir several times to ask about the situation in Celestial Wolf City. However, in order to maintain his calm and confident demeanor, he held himself back. About half an hour later, the door to the secret room lit up with divine light, and a sound came from it. Obviously, since Lien Heir was asking for an audience outside the secret room, he must have important news to report. Prince Lien immediately perked up and waved his hand to open the door to the secret room. Creak, creak, creak. With a soft sound, the door to the secret room opened. Lien Heir quickly walked into the secret room and went down on one knee in front of the divine liquid pool. As he bowed, Prince Lien quietly observed his expression. The Lien Heir's expression was solemn. His lips were pursed and his eyelids drooped. His tone was low and forceful. Prince Lien had a bad premonition when he saw this. As expected, the Lien Heir straightforwardly reported, "Reporting to Your Highness, Heavenly Wolf City has sent a message reporting the results of last night's decisive battle. The situation was just as you expected. The elite forces of the 7 major sects were no match for Tianqing and the rest, and were completely annihilated. The area of Wolfhead Mountain outside the city has been razed to the ground within a radius of 2,000 li. Not even a single corpse remains." However, Prince Lien had already expected this outcome and was mentally prepared for it. However, when he heard the news with his own ears and confirmed that his guess was correct, his heart suddenly dropped and his body trembled. The last glimmer of hope and fantasy in his heart was shattered just like that. He was stunned for a long time before he gradually came back to his senses. This time, he wasn't angry or irritable. He only grinned coldly. "Ha ha ha! I already knew that those trash from the major sects were unreliable. That bastard Tianqing seems to be getting stronger and stronger. I really don't know how he grew so quickly. If this continues, who in the great Yin Empire can subdue him?" The Lien Heir remained silent and didn't dare to speak. After a moment of silence, he continued to report when Prince Lien didn't speak. "Reporting to Your Highness, apart from this bad news, there's also good news." Prince Lien raised his eyebrows and asked, "There's still good news?" He really couldn't figure out where the good news came from. The Lien Heir quickly reported, "Heavenly Wolf City has personally sent a message to report the situation to you. Last night, they followed your instructions and sent the city guard commander and 10 captains to lead thousands of city guards to encircle Tianqing and the rest. In the end, Tianqing and the rest resisted with all their might, and indeed killed all the city guards and left. This matter spread throughout Heavenly Wolf City, and the Heavenly Wolf City Lord posted a notice expressing his anger and condemnation. He also said that he would go all out to hunt down Tianqing and the rest. The Heavenly Wolf City Lord also reported this matter to the Heavenly Wolf Princess and even the king. This morning, the king announced this matter in front of everyone in the imperial court, causing the officials to be filled with righteous indignation. The king flew into a rage and ordered the imperial guard to hunt down and capture Tianqing at all costs to uphold the law and restore the prestige of the nation. After the Lien Heir finished his report, he said to Prince Lien, "Your Highness, your plan went smoothly. Tianqing and the rest have become the public enemy of the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. The Raging Flame Divine Kingdom and the royal family also have a legitimate excuse to go all out to kill Tianqing. This should be considered good news." Hearing this, Prince Lien did not feel happy. Instead, He frowned and revealed a deep look of worry. Only an idiot like you would think this is good news. Prince Lien's gaze was cold as he shouted in a deep voice. The Lien heir's body trembled as he promptly kowtowed and apologized. This subordinate knows his mistake. This subordinate is slow-witted. Your Highness, please dispel my doubts. Prince Lien expressionlessly said. This king instructed the heavenly Wolf City Lord to send a group of city guards to their deaths in order to incite public anger in Tianxing and give Chang'e an excuse to make a move. This was a very simple scheme, not a crafty one. If this king can think of it, Tianxing can naturally understand it as well. But this king's true goal was to probe his background and see how deep it is. If he didn't tangle with the city guards and chose to flee Heavenly Wolf City, it means that he still has some misgivings and doesn't dare to become enemies with the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. But he didn't have any misgivings and directly killed the city guards. What does this mean? He simply doesn't care about the revenge of the royal family. He has absolute confidence in dealing with this king and has enough strength to deal with the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. Moreover, he might have already known that Chang'e is loyal to this king. The Lien heir was greatly shocked and exclaimed in disbelief. How? How is this possible? The relationship between your Highness and the royal family is a major secret. How could that bastard know? Prince Lien's expression was sinister as he coldly sneered. Don't forget, Niefeun might not be dead yet. That old bastard is really cunning and can't be underestimated. This king is increasingly suspicious. In order to survive, he sought refuge with Tianxing and provided a lot of secrets and information to Tianxing. Otherwise, how could Tianxing have been able to find the target so quickly and accurately when dealing with the 7 great sects and the Spirit Sword sect? The Lien heir suddenly understood and angrily nodded. Niefeun, that scoundrel, actually became a traitor and betrayed your Highness. He deserves to die 10,000 times. Prince Lien calmed his anger and waved his hand. It's useless to talk about this now. Tianxing will soon arrive at the royal city. Immediately send a message and have the people of the Raging Flame branch gather and be on standby. There will be a decisive battle outside the royal city within a month or 10 days. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3155. Sirius County. In a vast mountain near the border. This area was very desolate, surrounded by mountains for hundreds of thousands of miles. In the deep mountains, there were few people. Who knew how many ferocious beasts were hidden. Fortunately, this area was rich in divine power and was also a place rich in resources. It was suitable for exploration and cultivation. Ji Tianxing and the others took the divine ship and stopped when they passed by this area. They hid in the belly of a 1,000-foot mountain and opened up a cave as a temporary cultivation place. Lin Shui shrank the divine ship to 10 feet and placed it in the cave. She, Blood Illusion God, Gold Left Emissary, Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, and the others entered the divine ship to recuperate. Zhenhong's injuries were more serious. After all, she entered the state of madness in every battle and transformed into a 1,000-foot-tall, dragon-blooded war goddess. She was too big a target and difficult to dodge. Her attacks were too powerful, so of course, her injuries were serious. Ji Tianxing trusted her more, so he took her into the Jiuqian Tenju Tower to cultivate in the distorted time and space. This was her first time entering the distorted time and space. She was immediately stunned by the gorgeous scene in front of her, especially when she learned that the flow of time here was 50 times faster than the outside world. She was even more surprised and shocked. After the initial shock, she came to a realization. She finally understood why Ji Tianxing's strength had skyrocketed. No wonder young master's strength has obvious growth every time he goes into seclusion. The longest is half a month, and the shortest is 3 to 5 days. It turns out that he's cultivating in seclusion here. 1 day here is equivalent to 50 days in the outside world. It was not difficult for Zhenhong to guess that Ji Tianxing's cultivation time was 50 times longer than the other God Clan members. His talent was also outstanding. In addition, his identity and origin were mysterious. He had endless resources and super skills. It was natural for him to have such terrifying strength now. As Ji Tianxing flew in the distorted time and space, he soon saw several familiar figures. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, White Dragon, Black Dragon, and Qian Yu. Everyone had met before. Without Ji Tianxing's introduction, Zhen Hong knew that these were the people closest to him. At the same time, she understood that today was the most important day of her life. From this moment on, it meant that Ji Tianxing truly trusted and accepted her. She also became one of the closest people to Ji Tianxing. In addition to being touched, he was also grateful. This was because she knew that a genius like Ji Tianxing, a peerless expert, was destined to have no lack of followers. If they were able to follow by his side, not only would they be able to obtain care and guidance, they would even be able to create all sorts of miracles and glory with him. And they would even be able to witness him walk to the peak of the divine Tao. To the ordinary Protoss, this was an opportunity and blessing that they would never encounter in their entire lives. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, and the others were all cultivating. They were about to break through again, especially Ji Wushuang. He was currently at the peak of the celestial deity realm and was about to break through to the divine lord realm very soon. Bai Long hadn't started cultivating yet. He greeted Zhen Hong and went to find a place to heal himself. Ji Tianxing reminded Zhen Hong, "This distorted space-time is the place for us to rest and cultivate. You just need to find a place to recuperate from your injuries. After your injuries have healed, you can cultivate in seclusion for a period of time. I'm sure you've benefited a lot from the previous few battles. You must not miss this rare opportunity to comprehend." Zhen Hong quickly nodded and said, "Don't worry, young master. Zhen Hong knows what to do. I won't disturb everyone's cultivation." Ji Tianxing immediately chuckled and said, "Of course I know you. I definitely won't disturb them. I'm just afraid that they will disturb you. However, you don't have to worry. They have all accepted you. They have no ill intentions towards you." Zhen Hong naturally understood this. She just smiled and nodded, saying no more. She bowed to Ji Tianxing and left. She found a place tens of thousands of feet away, took a divine pill, and began to cultivate to heal herself. Ji Tianxing also did not delay and hurriedly sat down to meditate and cultivate. He first sorted out those divine spark fragments from the spoils of war. On the whole, it could be seen that they were the divine spark fragments of 136 divine lords. But in reality, many of the divine spark fragments were not complete and were somewhat missing. Fortunately, the missing divine spark fragments were all those low-rank divine lords and a few middle-rank divine lords. As for the 7 major sects, masters and protectors, they were all high-rank divine lords. Their divine spark fragments could still be pieced together completely. Thus, Ji Tianxing did not fuss about it. He cast the devouring divine ability and quickly devoured piece after piece of divine spark fragments. While absorbing large amounts of divine power, he also selected usable divine Tao laws from the divine spark fragments. This process was relatively long and also tested his patience. But he had cultivated for so many years and had long gotten used to it. After entering a focused state of cultivation, he even forgot the passage of time. Unknowingly, 3 months had passed. A full 90 days' time, Ji Tianxing only finished devouring and refining over 130 divine spark fragments. At the same time, he even stripped away 18 types of divine Tao laws from the divine spark fragments. Originally, he already grasped 292 types of laws. Adding on the newly added 18 types of laws, it reached as many as 310. Such a horrifying number of laws. Only divine king powerhouses could achieve it, surveying the entire Great Yin Empire. No, placing in the entire North Heaven region, even the entire Boundless Heaven continent, there is absolutely not a divine lord who could grasp 310 types of laws like him. 300 types of divine Tao laws was the insurmountable chasm between divine lords and divine kings. And now, Ji Tianxing did it. He broke this chasm and created another miracle invisibly. However, if he did not say it out, no one would know the existence of this miracle. Apart from a number of laws increasing, his strength also skyrocketed more than 3 times, reaching the peak of the 7th-stage realm. He was already not far away from the 8th-level Divine Lord realm. Ji Tianxing stopped cultivating and opened both eyes. Such a delightful harvest, but he was not agitated or overjoyed. Instead, he heaved a sigh. Sigh. The more divine Tao laws I grasp, the fewer laws I can refine. Interesting, powerful, high enough grade divine Tao laws are already getting lesser and lesser. Furthermore, the divine Tao laws that those divine lords grasp, 95% of them are all similar. At this rate, even if I refine several hundred sets of divine spark fragments at once, the laws obtained will also get lesser and lesser. No choice, after all. These people are all divine lords. I reckon that only by killing a divine king can I obtain large amounts of divine Tao laws. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. After resting for a moment, he started to get busy with another matter again, cleaning and organizing the spoils of war from before. Spoils of war worth over 100 billion were stored in over 2,000 interspatial rings. Wanting to sort them out was simply a massive project. If it were a mortal, they would not be able to clear them out even if they use a lifetime or 100 years. But Ji Tianxing's divine soul and divine sense were already powerful to an unfathomable extent long ago. Just using 3 days' time, he finished sorting out the spoils of war and divided them into 8 portions. Chapter 31:56. Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation and distributed the spoils to everyone. He first gave Bai Long a share, which was stored in 3 interspatial rings. The total value was about 12 billion. The resources and divine items here were all useful to the White Dragon. Then, he gave Zhen Hong a share, which was also stored in 3 interspatial rings. The value was about 15 billion. Bai Long and Zhen Hong were the same. They were both in seclusion to heal their wounds. So, Ji Tianxing did not wake them up. He placed the interspatial rings in front of them and left quietly. He left the distorted space-time and returned to the cave. Then, he entered Lin Xue's divine ship. Lin Xue, Sir God Blood Illusion, Left Emissary Jean, and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, were all cultivating in their respective secret chambers. Ji Tianxing placed a few interspatial rings outside their secret chambers. Those were the rewards they deserved. Lin Xue received the most spoils, which were worth about 20 billion. The reward that Sir God Blood Illusion received was about 16 billion. Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, each received about 12 billion. So far, Ji Tianxing had distributed 6 spoils of war. The 2 remaining spoils of war in his hands were stored in an interspatial ring. One of them was shockingly valuable. It contained the belongings of the leaders of the 7 major sections. The total value was immeasurable. Just the divine weapons, equipment, elixirs, and treasures inside were worth about 30 billion. If those strange and rare treasures were included, the value would be even more shocking. Of course, this spoil of war belonged to him. The other spoil of war only contained 1 billion worth of resources and treasures. This interspatial ring was for Nie Feiyun. Ever since Nie Feiyun admitted defeat and surrendered to Ji Tianxing, he had been conscientious and cautious. Ji Tianxing had never criticized him. He had even praised him twice. Even so, Nie Feiyun did not dare to let his guard down. He knew in his heart that he was the one who surrendered later. His identity was different from Lin Xue, Zhen Hong, and the others. Furthermore, everyone still hadn't completely accepted him as a member, so Ji Tianxing couldn't really trust him either. Under such circumstances, he could not have any complaints or dissatisfaction. He could only be more cautious and hope to seize the opportunity to perform outstandingly. Previously, Xue Lin and the others had participated in the battle and suffered serious injuries. Now, they were recuperating. Nie Feiyun obeyed Ji Tianxing's orders and hid in the divine battleship. Naturally, he did not participate in the final battle. At this moment, he was alone in the secret chamber, but he did not cultivate. He was in a daze, pondering over a problem. Grand Prince Lien has been feuding with Tianqing for a long time. He has fought from the Blood Flame Divine Nation to the Raging Flame Divine Nation, but he has never been able to gain the upper hand. This time, when the 7 great sects fought against him, they were all killed by him. Both Dao Qinxiu and Luo Lushui were great figures who had dominated the Divine Nation for thousands of years. But in the end, these people were all unable to withstand a single blow from Tianqing. The 9 major sects loyal to Grand Prince Lien had been destroyed. Now, only the Heavenly Fusion sect and the Raging Flame royal family remained under Grand Prince Lien's command. Judging from the current situation, Tianqing had a higher chance of winning. Back then, I decisively surrendered and was able to follow him. It was indeed a wise choice. Although I have yet to gain his trust, and the others are still on guard against me, I will persevere. However, as long as this old man perseveres, I may be able to gain their trust over time. In the future, if I can become one of Tianqing's confidants, or even his butler and loyal servant, that would be a great honor and glory. Niefeyun thought to himself, his heart filled with hope and anticipation. Even though he was once the master of a sect, a high and mighty figure, if others heard his words and knew that his wish was to become Ji Tianqing's loyal servant, he would definitely be ridiculed and ridiculed. However, he was well aware that this was not a humiliation at all. Instead, it was an honor, because he firmly believed that Ji Tianqing's future was limitless. He was also the genius who had the most hope of becoming a divine king in his life. Did being a loyal servant and butler of an unparalleled divine king sound like a loss of face? Of course not. It would only make all the divine lords envious and jealous. Just as Niefeyun was daydreaming, the secret chamber's door lit up with divine light, and a sound came out. Niefeyun was immediately startled awake, frowning in confusion. Who would look for me at this time? Could it be that I have to go to war again? No. Everyone just stopped to recuperate for 2 days. It's impossible to go to war so soon. With a heart full of doubts, he got up and opened the secret chamber's door. A white-robed youth stepped into the secret chamber. It was Ji Tianqing. Niefeyun was stunned for a moment and hurriedly bowed, saying, "Greetings to young Master Tianqing. This old man is at your command." He thought that Ji Tianqing must have some matter or mission to suddenly look for him. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "You don't have to be nervous. This lord guessed that you didn't cultivate, so I came to take a look. There's no mission for you." Only then did Niefeyun relax a little. He was somewhat surprised and touched in his heart. Young master has a divine foresight to actually guess that this old man didn't cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianqing shot him a glance and said with a smile, "All right, don't flatter this lord anymore. You've followed this lord for so long. How can this lord not understand your thoughts? Not letting you participate in the decisive battle previously, you'll definitely think carefully and let your imagination run wild. This old man dares not." Niefeyun hurriedly bowed and said in a solemn tone, "I'll listen to young master's instructions for everything. How can this old man dare to have other thoughts?" Ji Tianqing frowned and said, "Chatting with you is the most boring. Forget it. This lord will get straight to the point." Finished talking, he took out an interspatial ring and handed it in front of Niefeyun. "In the decisive battle with the 7 major sects this time, we won a total victory and seized most of the 7 major sects' resources and belongings. Although you didn't participate in the decisive battle and didn't make any battle achievements, but you providing the information of the 7 major sects previously is also credit that can't be ignored. The things in this ring are your reward." When Niefeyun heard, he didn't even look at the ring and hurriedly bowed and declined. "Many thanks for young master's great kindness. But this old man didn't make any contributions. How can I dare to receive a reward? Young master, please take back the reward. Otherwise, this old man's heart can't be at ease. In the future, when this old man really makes a contribution, it'll be justifiable for you to reward me again." Ji Tianqing immediately revealed a playful smile and said, "All right, don't play the game of advancing in order to retreat with this lord. Could it be that this lord will think highly of you like this? Put away your little thoughts. This lord has always been clear about rewards and punishments. Gratitude and grudges are all right and wrong. Those who make a contribution should be rewarded, and those who make a mistake must be punished. If you decline again, then this lord will really take it back. Since Ji Tianxing said it so bluntly, Nie Feiyun no longer declined and hurriedly received the interspatial ring with both hands, accepting it with a heart full of joy. To him, how many resources and treasures were stored in this interspatial ring was not important. He was the Feiyun sect master. The resources and belongings in his hands were also worth 20 to 30 billion. What really made him happy and excited was that Ji Tianxing's attitude towards him was gradually changing. This reward was also the greatest affirmation and encouragement for his performance since he defected. Chapter 31:57. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He stood up and left. If it was someone else, he would have encouraged them and said something like, "Keep up the good work." But he felt that there was no need to say those words to Nie Feiyun. This old man was a shrewd person. There was no need to say anything, and he understood it on his own. After Ji Tianxing left, the door to the secret room closed again. Only then did Nie Feiyun reveal a gratified smile. He murmured in a low voice, "My previous efforts and performance were not in vain. Following such a wise and straightforward master is the most worry-free. Unlike that guy, Grand Prince Lien, who is too shrewd and temperamental. No one can fathom him and is always on tenterhooks. Under such circumstances, even if others submit to him, they will only fear him and will never be of one mind." Then he opened the spatial ring and checked the resources and wealth inside. After a while, he counted out the total value of the wealth, and wealth was about 1 billion. These resources and wealth were dispensable to him, so it was not enough to excite him. However, when he saw a set of broken armor and 2 strangely shaped divine swords stored in the spatial ring, he could not help but tremble and tear up. He ignored the mountain of divine stones, divine pills, and divine artifacts and took out the damaged armor and dual swords. He hugged them tightly in his arms, and tears poured out of his eyes. "Honor, my honor! Father finally sees you." The current Nie Feiyun was no longer as calm and collected as before. He was heartbroken and in agony. He hugged the damaged armor and dual swords tightly and intimately rubbed them. He could sense a weak aura from the 2 divine artifacts. That was the aura left behind by his son in the 2 divine artifacts. It was also his only thought in this life. After all, the damaged armor and dual swords were his son's natal divine artifacts. There was also a matter of the past involved in this matter. About 100 years ago, his son, Nie Yunhan, and an elder of Soaring Rainbow sect went to a secret realm to explore and search for treasures. Nie Yunhan was young and full of vigor. He was at the age where he treated people with integrity and sincerity. His thoughts and shrewdness were still shallow. Before that, Nie Feiyun had warned his son not to get too close with Soaring Rainbow sect. He always felt that the elder of Soaring Rainbow sect had an ulterior motive for getting to know his son. But Nie Yunhan refused to listen and firmly believed that the young elder of Soaring Rainbow sect was very congenial with him and could be called a confidant. Reality proved that Nie Feiyun guessed right. After Nie Yunhan and the elder of Soaring Rainbow sect entered the secret realm, they disappeared without a trace. After half a year, the young elder of Soaring Rainbow sect escaped with serious injuries and returned to Soaring Rainbow sect to recuperate. But Nie Yunhan never appeared again. Nie Feiyun went to Soaring Rainbow sect to ask the elder about his son's whereabouts. The other party informed him that Nie Yunhan had met with a mishap in the secret realm and had already died. He had risked his life to save Nie Yunhan, but he hadn't been able to save him. He had also been seriously injured and had been unconscious for a long time. Naturally, he had a dispute with the Soaring Rainbow sect's elder and almost came to blows within the Soaring Rainbow sect's mountain gate. In the end, it was the Myriad Flow sect that stepped forward to mediate and calm this storm. Nie Feiyun could not accept the fact that his son had died. He personally led several elders of the Flying Cloud sect into the secret realm to investigate. In the end, they spent a few years and entered the secret realm 9 times, searching all the places. In the end, they couldn't find Niyunhan, not even his remains or bones. At this time, Soaring Rainbow Sect grasped many secrets of Soaring Cloud Sect. Soaring Rainbow Sect acted in secret, killing many genius disciples and snatching many resources and treasures, causing Soaring Cloud Sect's power to weaken. Niefeyun was finally convinced that it was the elder of Soaring Rainbow Sect who killed his son. Even the secrets and information that the Soaring Rainbow Sect possessed were dug out from his son. Soaring Rainbow Sect naturally refused to admit it. The two sects formed enmity and continued to fight for several decades, but the outcome was never decided. Moreover, Spirit Sword Sect also had enmity with Soaring Cloud Sect, so they also interfered. Soaring Cloud Sect was attacked from both sides and gradually became unable to contend, gradually declining. It was also at that time that Prince Lian developed his power in the Raging Flame Divine Country, successively subduing Soaring Cloud Sect, Spirit Sword Sect, and Soaring Rainbow Sect. Under the pressure of Prince Lian, the 3 great sects stopped fighting. However, the pain of losing his son made Niefeyun unable to let go, and his hatred for Soaring Rainbow Sect also never diminished. It was also because of this that he didn't hesitate to betray the 7 sects when he sought refuge with Ji Tianxing. After the destruction of Spirit Sword Sect and Soaring Rainbow Sect, he secretly rejoiced and was grateful to Ji Tianxing. After all, Ji Tianxing helped him get his revenge. Now, Nie Yunhan's remains actually appeared in this spatial ring. These 2 divine tools became the objects of Nie Feiyun's grief. To him, they were priceless treasures. After crying and talking to himself for a long time, Nie Feiyun finally calmed down. He frowned and said to himself with a heart full of doubts, "How did young Master Tianxing obtain Han's remains? Could it be from the spatial ring of that bastard from Soaring Rainbow Sect? It should be like this. That bastard killed Han's son and guessed that this old man would explore the secret realm to find out the truth. Therefore, that bastard hid Han Er's relics. However, how would young Master Tianxing know the cause of Han's death and the grudge between this old man and Soaring Rainbow Sect? Under normal circumstances, even if he took inventory of the spatial ring, he also wouldn't notice Han's remains." This question made Nie Feiyun puzzled after much thought. If it were someone else, they might feel that this was just a coincidence. But Nie Feiyun firmly believed that this was absolutely not a coincidence. It was definitely Ji Tianxing's deliberate doing. Therefore, in addition to being grateful to Ji Tianxing in his heart, he was even more in awe of Ji Tianxing. Young Master Tianxing is indeed unfathomable, his means reaching the heavens. Moreover, he's meticulous and uses kindness and authority. He's truly a peerless wise lord, worthy of this old man following him for life. Nie Feiyun had experienced too many storms and bumps in his life. Losing his wife, losing his son, his last disciple dying in battle, betraying his brothers, falling out with his good friends, and so on. He had experienced everything. His temperament had long faded, and he also had a deep understanding of the despicableness of human nature. Basically, there was no one who could make him respect and admire from the bottom of his heart. Even Grand Prince Lian only made him feel fearful. But now, he respected and admired Ji Tianxing. Just this matter alone made him see warmth in the cold, and decided to follow and be loyal to Ji Tianxing for life. After a long time, Nie Feiyun solemnly put away the broken armor and strange dual swords, his expression and eyes regaining calmness and clarity. He started to circulate his qi and cultivate, conserving his energy. He had already made up his mind to maintain his peak condition and be ready to fight at any time. Ji Tianxing treated him well, and he absolutely could not let down Ji Tianxing's trust and expectations. In the next battle, he must have an outstanding performance and establish meritorious service. Mobile version of the fastest website updated. Chapter 31:58. After distributing the spoils of war, Ji Tianxing entered the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda again and cultivated in the distorted space-time. He estimated that Lin Shui, God Lord Blood Illusion, and the rest still needed at least half a month to recover from their injuries. This way, he could still cultivate in seclusion for another 2 years in the distorted space-time. Just nice. I'll make use of this opportunity to attempt to break through to the 8th level Divine Lord realm. Ji Tianxing made up his mind and entered the distorted space-time, heading straight for the blood flame sacred tree. Before long, he arrived under the sacred tree. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Ji Wushuang were all cultivating in seclusion under the sacred tree. Ji Wushuang had already reached the critical moment of breakthrough. White Dragon, Qianyu, Black Dragon, and Zhenhong were scattered around the sacred tree, also recuperating and cultivating. Ji Tianxing stopped and observed for a moment. Finally, his gaze landed on the sacred tree. He keenly discovered that the blood flame sacred tree seemed to have grown 10 feet taller. The burning blood flames were even more turbulent. Furthermore, many purple sprouts emerged from the bare branches and treetops. The entire sacred tree appeared to be full of vitality. Its power also clearly increased a bit. This discovery made Ji Tianxing feel delighted. Previously at the Skyfire Lotus Lake, I killed several hundred people from the Flying Cloud sect. In the end, the Blood Flame Sacred Tree did not have any obvious changes. I even thought that I was overthinking. Unexpectedly, when I killed the people from the 7 major sects one after another, the Blood Flame Sacred Tree clearly grew taller. Its power also increased by a lot. From this, it seems that my previous conjecture was correct. The Blood Flame Sacred Tree can indeed absorb divine soul and bloodline power to continuously strengthen itself. It's just that this sacred tree is a quasi-king level divine item. It needs to absorb a massive amount of divine soul and bloodline power to have an obvious growth. More than 1,000 people from 2 or 3 sects provided divine soul and bloodline power after death. To the sacred tree, it's very weak. Only when the number of deaths reaches a certain level, such as the several thousand people from the 7 major sects, will have an effect. Thinking up to here, Ji Tianxing frowned and pondered for a moment. Another idea popped up in his mind. No, the amount of energy the sacred tree could absorb depended not only on the number of people, but also on the realm of the deceased. When I exterminated the Flying Cloud sect, I only killed over 20 divine lords. When the 7 sects were destroyed, more than 200 divine lords had died on the battlefield from the looks of it. The more divine lord powerhouses that die, the more power the sacred tree can absorb. Ji Tianxing was in a good mood after understanding the reason behind the sacred tree's growth. He was full of anticipation. The road of revenge in the future will definitely be filled with slaughter, mountains of corpses, and seas of blood. If the blood flame sacred tree continues to devour and grow stronger, it will become a king-grade divine item sooner or later. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. He thought of Burial of Heaven and couldn't help but tease. Burial of Heaven, how's your strength recovering? I'm not far from the divine king realm. Even this blood flame sacred tree will soon become a king-grade divine object. You, on the other hand, shouldn't be outdone by this sacred tree. For a long time, Burial of Heaven had been keeping a low profile, recuperating and accumulating power in secret. Now that it heard Ji Tianxing's teasing, it finally let out a low and calm voice that sounded in Ji Tianxing's mind. You've been fighting and killing, and the blood flame sacred tree has absorbed a lot of energy. However, I haven't been idle either. I've also been absorbing useful energy and trying my best to recover my strength. Now that I've recovered to the level of a Supreme Monarch Grade Divine Artifact, I've reached my limit due to the shackles of Origin Stones. If you want to recover to the level of a King Grade Divine Artifact, you'll have to do what you did in the past and go to the outer space to collect 108 stars and a few Divine King Grade materials. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll never be able to recover to the level of a Divine King. Ji Tianxing fell silent after hearing Burial of Heaven's words. Back then, When he was roaming the god realm and making rapid progress, he also continuously strengthened Burial of Heaven. In order to make Burial of Heaven a king-grade divine artifact, he traveled to various continents in search of various divine king-grade materials. When Burial of Heaven broke through to the divine king-grade, he went to the outer space and spent 100 years refining 108 stars as materials to upgrade the divine artifact. It was because of this that Burial of Heaven became a top king-grade divine artifact and was invincible in the god realm. Unfortunately, the current Ji Tianxing hadn't even stepped out of the Tianbei region, let alone travel to various continents. As for going to the outer space, that was even more wishful thinking. Without reaching the divine king realm, it was impossible to break through the void and enter the universe. After all, this was the god realm, a high-class plane. It wasn't like the low-class planes, where space was very weak and could easily break through the void. After pondering for a moment, Ji Tianxing finally spoke to pacify Burial of Heaven. Old friend, don't worry. You first focus on accumulating strength. When I find the divine king-grade materials, I'll definitely help you break through to the divine king-grade. As for going to the outer space to refine the stars, that will have to wait until I recover to the divine king-grade. Burial of Heaven responded and said in a low voice, I know, you must have a plan. Actually, you've only returned to the god realm for 2 years, and it's already very heaven-defying for you to have such strength today. Compared to your previous life, your speed of improvement is 100 times faster. I believe that you'll be able to recover to the divine king-grade in 3 to 5 years at most. 3 to 5 years? Ji Tianxing frowned and said with a chuckle, It sounds very short and shocking, but I still think it's too slow. After all, Wuhan is still in the dragon realm. After recovering to the divine king grade, I have to go to the dragon realm to find him as soon as possible. Burial of Heaven comforted. Don't worry, Wuhan will be blessed by the heavens. Maybe it's not a disaster for him to be captured in the dragon realm. Maybe it's an opportunity. In short, you just have to follow the plan step by step. After saying that, Burial of Heaven fell into silence. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and began to cultivate. He consumed a large amount of origin stones, divine stones, and other resources, and absorbed the power of the blood flame sacred tree to focus on cultivating a technique. This technique was gradually comprehended and created by him during his recent seclusion. He temporarily named it the heaven-punishing divine art. As the name implied, this divine art was comprehended by him by observing the heaven-punishing sword formation. With the heaven-punishing sword formation as the main support, he gradually deduced and figured it out with the hundreds of sword Dao abilities and thousands of divine arts from his previous life. Of course, the current heaven-punishing divine art only had a general idea, direction, and cultivation method. It was just a prototype and not a complete technique. But this was a divine art that Ji Tianxing created by combining the cultivation experience of his previous life with the mysteries of the heaven-punishing sword formation. In terms of profundity and power, it definitely surpassed any technique that he cultivated in his previous life. If he could deduce this technique to the extreme, it was very likely that he could evolve an unparalleled divine art secret. Currently, the heaven-punishing divine art is only a prototype. I can only be considered as a beginner. I'm still in the process of exploring and deducing. When I deduce the first level and cultivate it to perfection, I should be able to recover to the divine king grade. Ji Tianxing thought to himself, full of confidence and anticipation for the heaven-punishing divine art. Chapter 31:59. In the warped space-time, time passed extremely quickly. But Ji Tianxing concentrated on cultivation, fully focused on deducing and comprehending the heaven-punishing divine art, completely forgetting the passage of time. Every day that passed, he would carry out hundreds of deductions and attempts on the heaven-punishing divine art. As day after day passed, the heaven-punishing divine art was perfected at a slow speed, continuously advancing towards an even more profound and powerful realm. Ji Tianxing's strength also slowly increased along with it, becoming stronger day after day. Unknowingly, a year passed. The heaven-punishing divine art's first-level cultivation method was perfected by Ji Tianxing to 70%. His strength also quietly reached the limits of the 7th-level divine lord realm. But he was immersed in the heaven-punishing divine art, deducing, exploring, and experimenting tirelessly. He did not think of impacting 8th-level divine lord realm at all. But cultivation, this sort of thing, was complementary to each other in the first place. Even if he did not deliberately attack the bottleneck and focused on cultivating the heaven-punishing divine art, he could similarly increase his strength, crossing over obstacles and bottlenecks. Just like this, another year passed. In this 1 year, the heaven-punishing divine art's progress became even slower, merely perfecting 30%. But the heaven-punishing divine art's first-level cultivation method, Ji Tianxing, successfully deduced it. Even though he only cultivated the first-level cultivation method to the realm of just entering the rudimentary realm and was still very far from proficient and major success, and even further away from grand completion. But he still broke through the bottleneck naturally, reaching 8th-level divine lord realm. When breaking through, Ji Tianxing's entire body gave off a rainbow-colored divine light. 8 divine dragon phantoms condensed above his head, spiraling and dancing for a few days before dissipating. Swoosh! When the 8 dragon phantoms dissipated and the rainbow-colored divine light converged, Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation. He opened both eyes, his gaze like 2 bolts of lightning, striking the warped space-time until it fluctuated. He emitted an overbearing and sacred aura all over his body, only withdrawing it into his body after a while. The heaven-punishing divine art that I created is indeed a feasible path. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself, his spirits roused and filled with anticipation. A moment later, he got up and observed the surroundings, muttering to himself, I've already been in close seclusion for 2 years and successfully broke through to the 8th-stage realm. Half a month should have passed in the outside world. I think Lin Shui left emissary Jean and the others should have recovered by about 70 to 80%, right? Ji Tianxing looked around and saw Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and Zhen Hong cultivating. Even Ji Wushuang was also concentrating on cultivating. The current her already successfully broke through to the divine lord realm, reaching the first-level divine lord realm. She had been taught by Yun Yao and Ji Ku since she was young, so she knew the importance of strengthening the foundation of Shinto. At this moment, she was consolidating her foundation of the divine Tao and accumulating her strength. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly with satisfaction. His gaze then fell on Zhen Hong. Zhen Hong cultivated for 2 years, and his injuries had long recovered. He was currently at the critical juncture of assaulting the 5th-level divine lord realm. If it was in the past, her bloodline power had not been stimulated, and her talent and comprehension were not enough. Even if he tried a few hundred times, he might not succeed. However, things are different now. She had only broken through the bottleneck 7 times, and she was about to succeed. Seeing that there was no suspense in her breakthrough this time, Ji Tianxing felt relieved and left the divine pagoda. Swoosh! A white light flashed. Ji Tianxing returned to the cave. Inside the gloomy and quiet cave, Lin Shui's divine ship was suspended in the air. Ji Tianxing entered the divine ship and rushed to the assembly hall. It was only to see that Lin Shui's injuries had long recovered and ended her cultivation. She was currently sitting in the hall with her eyes closed to rest her mind. Sensing that Ji Tianxing had arrived, she opened both eyes and greeted him. Tianxing, your closed seclusion ended, eh? Really seeing the devil. It's only been a short half a month. How did you become stronger again? Lin Shui just wanted to exchange a few pleasantries with him, but discovered to her surprise that Ji Tianxing's strength became stronger again. Even though she could not see through Ji Tianxing's ins and outs, and only felt that he was unfathomable. But she could feel that Ji Tianxing's aura was several times stronger than before. To actually have such a horrifying improvement in such a short time, It was simply terrifying. Ji Tianxing revealed a faint smile and waved his hand. Don't be so surprised. You've known me for so long. Haven't you gotten used to it yet? Lin Shui glared at him and said exasperatedly, Pervert. Ji Tianxing frowned and said unhappily, Don't scold me. I'm not scolding you. I'm praising you. Lin Shui rolled her eyes. Ji Tianxing could not be bothered to chat with her and asked about serious matters. What about the others? How's the recovery of their injuries? Lin Shui said lazily, I've already asked them. They're more or less recovered. If you need anything, I'll get them to gather immediately. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, No need to gather. Let them continue to cultivate. I'll steer the divine ship. We'll continue south. With that, he turned to leave and headed to the control room of the divine ship. Lin Shui got up and followed him. She tilted her head and asked, Looks like you're determined to go to the royal city and kill Prince Lien and the Emperor of Raging Flame? Ji Tianxing did not stop walking and answer without turning his head. Prince Lien must be killed. As for the Emperor of Raging Flame, we'll see if he's courting death. Lin Shui raised her eyebrows and smiled. Hee, I like your domineering attitude. You were already strong enough, and now you've become even stronger. It looks like you can do whatever you want in the Great Yin Empire, and no one can stop you. Ji Tianxing stepped into the control room, waved his hand to activate the divine formation, and started to steer the divine ship. As he steered the divine ship, he said calmly, That's not accurate. You can't limit yourself to the Great Yin Empire. You should look at the entire Tianbei region. To be precise, I'm invincible under the divine king realm now. Lin Shui's body stiffened, and she rolled her eyes. Kid, don't you understand something? When others praise you, you should be more humble. That way, others will praise you in the future. You're so straightforward and arrogant. You're so annoying. Ji Tianxing turned to look at her and smiled mockingly. It's good that you hate me. Well, I heard you say that you like me just now. You gave me a shock. When did I say that I like you? Lin Shui was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She immediately jumped up and exploded. On the surface, she looked very fierce and angry. However, her slightly red cheeks and stuttering voice made her seem a little guilty. Let's pretend that you didn't say anything. Ji Tianxing retracted his gaze and focused on steering the divine ship. After flying out of the cave, he flew high up into the sky at lightning speed. Lin Shui glared at him angrily. Seeing that he did not react, she did not want to harp on this topic. After a moment of silence, seeing that Ji Tianxing did not speak, she felt a little awkward. She pretended to be cold and said, I'll leave the divine ship to you. I'll continue to cultivate. If there's nothing important, I don't want to see you. Ji Tianxing didn't have much of a reaction. He just responded and focused his attention on the various divine formations. They looked like the divine formations that controlled the divine ship. They were more attractive than anything else. Lin Shui was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She stomped her foot and turned to leave. Chapter 3160. Ji Tianxing steered the divine warship and flew over the vast mountain range, leaving the Sky Wolf County. Next, the divine warship entered the Raging Flame County and was not far from the royal city. The news of Ji Tianxing's decisive battle in the Sky Wolf City had already spread throughout the Raging Flame Divine Country. Regardless of the size of the factions or sects, they all knew that the 7 major sects had been completely wiped out. In an instant, the entire Raging Flame Divine Country was shaken. Countless factions were shocked and panicked as they discussed spiritedly. At the same time, the news of Ji Tianxing killing more than 1,000 Sky Wolf City guards had also spread throughout the Divine Country. Everyone knew about it. The King of Raging Flame even issued an edict to dispatch a large number of Imperial guards to encircle and annihilate Ji Tianxing. The various county guards also had to assist. As a result, the entire Raging Flame Divine Country entered a state of war readiness. Ji Tianxing and the others became public enemies. As long as they appeared in front of the public, they would be besieged. However, this was only on the surface. Or rather, this was only the hope of the various factions and the common people. In reality, Tianxing steered the divine warship and flew continuously for 3 days and 3 nights without being attacked or intercepted. Only a few Divine Lord experts formed groups of 3 to 5 to secretly track and check the divine warship's tracks. Although there was a certain factor in this, it was that the divine warship was too fast and difficult to track. However, only a few people understood the deeper reason. The King of Raging Flame issued an edict only for the common people of the divine country to see. It is also equivalent to an official declaration of war against me. But in reality, the King of Raging Flame is very clear that the Imperial Guards and the various county guards cannot kill me. No matter how many come, they will all be sent to their deaths. Instead of dispatching the Imperial Guards to encircle and annihilate me with great fanfare, it is better to send elite experts to keep track of our movements. At the same time, gather a large number of troops and powerful generals outside the royal city and have another decisive battle with us. In the discussion hall of the divine warship, this was Tianxing's answer to everyone's questions. At this moment, the divine warship had already reached the hinterland of the Raging Flame County and would arrive outside the royal city tomorrow morning. Tianxing handed the divine battleship over to left emissary Jin. He gathered Xuelin, Blood Illusion God Monarch, Zhenhong, and the others for a small meeting. With regard to the upcoming final battle, Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the rest were nervous and uneasy. Even though they all believed that Tianxing's strength was absolutely invincible below Divine King. However, they were still worried and anxious. After all, Prince Lien and the King of the Raging Flame Country had joined hands. Not to mention the Heavenly Union sect behind Prince Lien. Just the power of the Raging Flame Country's ruler was already terrifying enough. There were countless Imperial Guards, Imperial Palace experts, and Divine Lord powerhouses from the various county cities. The number of Divine Lord powerhouses was definitely astonishing. In this decisive battle, they would be fighting against half of the Raging Flame Divine Country. How could they not be worried? Xuelin hesitated for a moment, then said, Tianxing, although you are very strong, we have too few people. Prince Lien and the ruler of the Raging Flame Country will definitely gather an army of thousands, or even tens of thousands, to deal with us. The Divine Lord powerhouses that the two of them could mobilize were in the tens of thousands. No matter how powerful you are, you won't be able to escape the fate of ants biting an elephant to death. Sir God Blood Illusion also nodded in agreement and said, Young Master, although we haven't inquired about the movements of Prince Lien and the King of the Raging Flame Country, the situation is already very obvious. Prince Lien and the King of the Raging Flame Country will definitely do their best to kill us. Once we kill our way into the royal city, the King of the Raging Flame Country will lose all face. Actually, we don't have to be so radical and take such a risk. There is no need for us to go alone and fight them head-on. The initiative is in our hands. We can use guerrilla warfare to harass them and kill them one by one. Compared to Lin Shui's straightforwardness, Sir God Blood Illusion's words were slightly more tactful. Moreover, his suggestion was rather pertinent, and everyone agreed to it. At least, the Blood Dragon Right Emissary, Zhenhong, and Yefeyun all agreed with this suggestion. Only Bai Long raised an objection. Without waiting for Tianxing to speak, he explained, Master is well aware of everyone's concerns. However, please believe that Master never fights a battle that he is not confident in. With the divine powers that Master has mastered and the divine pagoda, he is in an invincible position. At the very least, even if we are trapped in the formation of 10,000 troops, we will be safe and can retreat smoothly. However, this situation is absolutely impossible. Not only will Master be absolutely safe, but all of us will be alive and there will be no danger to our lives. In addition, Master has absolute power. Why do we need to use guerrilla warfare and kill them one by one? If we really do that, Prince Lien and the King of the Raging Flame Country will laugh at us. What Master needs to do is to crush them all in an invincible manner. Only in this way can we win to our heart's content. Hearing Bai Long's words, Lin Shui and the others fell silent. Since everyone's safety was guaranteed, what else was there to say? Moreover, Ji Tianxing's reputation in the bloody flame and raging flame divine kingdoms was like thunder that struck fear in people's hearts. He had already become synonymous with lawless, domineering, and invincible, and killing God. If they really used guerrilla warfare to harass him, wouldn't they lose their prestige and reputation? When they thought of this, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others no longer tried to persuade them. Seeing that everyone was silent, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "All right, everyone, rest for a while and conserve your energy. There will be a fierce battle tonight. Moreover, this battle will definitely shock the other nations and make our names known throughout Great Yin." Just a few simple words were enough to make everyone's blood boil, and they were filled with fighting spirit. This was especially true for Lin Shui and Bai Long. They had always liked to fight and were filled with anticipation. Although the others were not as excited as the two of them, they were also looking forward to it. After all, as members of the Divines who firmly pursued the peak of the Divine Path, who did not want to be famous, not long after, everyone returned to their respective secret chambers and sat down to adjust their breathing. Half a day passed quickly. At dawn, the divine ship flew into a vast mountain range. This mountain range was called Flying Dragon Mountain. The mountain range was not big. It ran from east to west and spanned 1,000,000 miles. This was the barrier to the north of the raging flame capital. After crossing Flying Dragon Mountain and crossing hundreds of thousands of miles of plains, they would arrive at the raging flame capital. When the raging flame divine nation was first established, this was the last line of defense for the raging flame capital during the war between the nations. Tonight, this was the last line of defense for Prince Lien and the Emperor of Raging Flame. Among the mountains, on the highest peak of Sky Dragon Mountain, Long Air, the Heavenly Union Sect Master, the Imperial Guard Governor, and a few great generals were armed and ready as they waited quietly. These 8 experts had the highest statuses. They were also the commanders of the army tonight. Behind them, 50 higher divine lords were lined up in a row. There were men and women of all ages, and their appearances and attire were different. Half of them were experts from the inner court who stayed in the palace for a long time and rarely showed themselves. There were also the protectors and elders of the Heavenly Union Sect's Raging Flame branch. The other half were the higher divine lords raised by Prince Lien and the Emperor of Raging Flame. These people on the mountain peak were the main force of tonight's battle. There were more than 10,000 elites lying in ambush within 3,000 miles. Tonight, rivers of blood were destined to flow. Chapter 3161. The night sky was as black as ink, devoid of any starlight. At the peak of Sky Dragon Mountain, cold winds howled, and killing intent filled the air. Even the heavens seemed to know that there would be a bloody battle tonight, and they were mourning. Dragon 2, the Heavenly Unity Sect Master, and the Imperial Army Governor waited patiently. Many experts stared at the northern night sky with awe-inspiring gazes, waiting for the light to appear. Waiting in silence was the most torturous. Time seemed to slow down. Only an hour passed, but it felt like an eternity to them. Finally, in the dark night sky of the north, a ray of light appeared. Whoosh! A pitch-black divine ship that was thousands of feet long flew across the sky, shining with 5-colored light. When it was still 1,000 miles away from Sky Dragon Mountain, the divine ship slowed down. The divine ship didn't conceal itself, nor did it conceal its aura. When it appeared, the expressions of Dragon 2, the Heavenly Unity Sect Master, and many experts changed. Anger appeared on their faces, and they frowned. Their gazes became even colder and sharper. Tianxing is here. Everyone, prepare to set up the array. Dragon 2 said in a low voice as he stared at the divine ship. Although he was humble and flattering in front of Prince Lien, he still had to act humble and flattering. But in front of outsiders, he was cold and arrogant. Tonight, he represented Prince Lien in supervising the battle, and his status was the most honorable. Hearing Dragon 2's order, the dozens of high-level divine lords on the mountain peak immediately flew into the sky and spread out, forming a line of defense. The remaining high-level divine lords all had honorable statuses. They all followed Dragon 2 into the night sky to meet the divine ship. Among these high-level divine lords, the one whose status was second only to Dragon 2 was the sect master of the Heavenly Unity sect's Raging Flame branch, Liang Jianqing. After all, he was the mainstay of the Heavenly Unity sect and one of Prince Lian's most trusted subordinates. The third person was the Imperial Guard's governor under the direct rule of the ruler, Yi Liang'an. In the army, these three were the strongest, having reached the 8th level of the Divine Lord realm. As for the 4 golden armor generals, their status was second only to the Imperial Army governor. They were the pillars of the Raging Flame divine country, fierce generals who had gone through countless battles. They were titled the 4 Directions Divine Generals, and each of them commanded millions of troops. There were also 3 high deity sovereigns in strange attire. They were strange people who were raised by the monarch. They were known as the Starbreaker 3 Elders. It was said that these 3 eccentric experts came from the south of the Tianbei region. They were once powerful figures in an empire. But in the great changes 1,000 years ago, that empire disappeared, and they fled all the way north. Many years ago, the 3 Starbreakers had come to the Great Yin Empire and taken root in the Raging Flame divine nation. For some reason, the king of the Raging Flame country got acquainted with the 3 elders of the Star Shatterer kingdom. Then, he took them into the royal palace and conferred them the title of Consecrator. The status of the 3 Starbreakers was second only to the Imperial Army governor and the 4 cardinal divine generals, much higher than those experts of the inner court. A total of 10 divine monarchs stood in a row in the night sky as they watched the divine battleship gradually approach. A moment later, the divine warship stopped in the night sky when it was still 100 miles away from the crowd. Shua! A white light flashed, and Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, Blood Illusion God, and the others appeared. Even Ye Feiyun followed behind Ji Tianxing. Only the left emissary Jin and the right emissary of the Blood Dragon stayed in the divine warship to control it. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Qin Yu and the Black Dragon also made preparations in the distorted space and time, ready to appear and join the battle at any time. The 2 sides faced each other in the night sky. Dragon 2 and the Imperial Army governor led one side, and they had the advantage in numbers. As for Ji Tianxing, there were only a few people beside him. In comparison, they seemed very weak and pitiful, but no one dared to underestimate them. The expressions of Long Air, Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liang were extremely serious. They were filled with vigilance and vigilance. Ji Tianxing looked around and glanced at the 10 commanders and the 50 high deity sovereigns who had formed a line of defense. He couldn't help but shake his head. Why isn't Prince Lian here? Why is he hiding in the royal city to recuperate? Is he afraid that I'll kill him in an instant? He stared at Dragon 2, Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liang, and with a dignified gaze as he asked in a low voice. Although his voice wasn't loud, it spread hundreds of miles, and countless people heard it clearly. Many deity sovereigns felt a strong sense of anger and humiliation. Their fighting spirit and killing intent surged in their hearts. Dragon 2 stared at Ji Tianxing and said expressionlessly, "What kind of noble status does His Highness have? Why would he attack personally? You're not qualified to do so with your identity as a villain. Moreover, His Highness is planning from thousands of miles away. Sending us servants is more than enough to tear you to pieces." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and looked at Long Air seriously. Then, he said, "It seems that you're the leader of this motley crew. If I'm not wrong, you should be Prince Lian's most trusted aide, right?" Nie Feiyun, who was standing behind Ji Tianxing, saw Dragon 2's appearance and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing. "Young master, this person is called Dragon 2. He's Prince Lian's personal bodyguard and his closest aide. In the past, Prince Lian's orders were mostly conveyed by Dragon 2. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. At this time, Dragon 2's voice was as cold as a bell. "My identity isn't important. Everyone here tonight only has one identity. That is a chivalrous person who upholds the good and punishes the evil on behalf of Tianqing. Tianqing, you're a demon who went on a killing spree in the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom and killed countless people. We come from all over the world and belong to different races and forces. Yet, we have to work together to kill you. Even the powerhouses of the Imperial Guard Corps have personally arrived. With so many of us besieging you, you should be honored to be buried here tonight. Dragon 2 clearly didn't want to reveal everyone's identities and origins, so he made up a dignified cover. Tianqing and the others sneered, but they were too lazy to expose such a low-level lie. Ha ha! Last time, the people who threatened to kill me all died on Wolfhead Mountain. Tonight, the same thing happened again. I admire your courage, but it's a pity that you guys aren't enough to kill. Tianqing sneered, shaking his head as he spoke. There was even some regret in his tone. These words thoroughly angered the 4 Directions Divine Generals, the 3-Star Breakers, and the 50 High Divine Lords. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. They gnashed their teeth and cursed Tianqing, angrily roaring. At this time, Heavenly Harmony Sect Master Liang Jianqing raised his palms, indicating for everyone to quiet down. He waved his hand and sent out several golden sword lights, which flew high into the sky. Soon, more than 10,000 elite experts appeared in the night sky from all directions. Among them, several thousand people were wearing standard armor. They were clearly the Imperial Guard Corps. There were also many people wearing the same robes and attire. They clearly came from various factions. These 13,000 over people's strength realm were all 8th level celestial deity realm and above. There were even 2,000 people whose strength reached the Divine Lord realm. So many elite experts formed a massive encirclement, sealing off a radius of 3,000 miles. Liang Jianqing stared at Tianqing and said with a cold smile, "Brat, is it enough to kill you now?" Tianqing's expression was indifferent as he shook his head again. Still not enough. Chapter 3162. Arrogant to the extreme. Liang Jianqing frowned and snorted coldly. But Imperial Army Governor Yi Liang was so angry that he started laughing. He pointed at the army in the night sky and sneered at Tianqing. "Kid, we all know that you are very strong and that you have many tricks up your sleeves. However, open your eyes wide and take a good look at how elite and valiant this 13,000-strong army is. These soldiers are not like the motley crew of the 7 major sections. Plus, we have 60 high-level Divine Lords. Is it not enough to kill you? Even a spit from each of us can drown you." The 4 Directions Divine Generals and the 3-Star Breaking Elders grinned coldly. The high-level Divine Lords in the night sky also chimed in. However, Tianqing remained unmoved. With an indifferent expression, he said, "You've misheard. I'm not talking about whether these people can kill me. I am saying that these 13,000 people are not enough for me to kill. I'll give you one more chance. Let those who are hiding in the dark come at me together. If they don't act now, they won't have the chance when the battle starts." His tone was calm, and he was not bluffing. However, the confidence and dominance in his words left countless Divine Lords dumbfounded. Their expressions turned particularly interesting. After a moment of silence, the crowd came back to their senses. They exploded with angry curses, excited shouts, and disdainful sneers. "Goddamn beast, your arrogance knows no bounds. This old man has lived for 20,000 years and has never seen such an arrogant and shameless person. Kid, do you really think you're a killing god? You think too highly of yourself. Tonight, we will end your undefeated legend and let you die without a burial place. Don't waste words with that bastard. Everyone kill. Kill him. No matter the cost, we must burn his bones and scatter his ashes." Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liang were already filled with humiliation and grief. Their bodies were bursting with anger and killing intent. Seeing that the soldiers were so agitated that they only wanted to attack, the 3 of them no longer hesitated. They waved their hands and gave the order to attack. "Kill! Kill him! Soldiers, grind the bones of the bandits to dust. Tonight, we will make him pay with his blood." As the 3 of them roared, the 10,000-strong army, which had been ready to attack for a long time, suddenly couldn't hold back their murderous intent and charged forward without any regard for their own safety. Kill! Brothers, charge! Kill the enemy and tear them to shreds. The monarch has decreed that whoever can chop off Tianqing's head will be conferred the title of Count and the title of Lord of the County. For the glory of Scandinavia, charge! In a split second, earth-shattering battle cries resounded in the night sky from all directions. As the many elite experts charged forward, the encirclement within a radius of 2,000 miles shrank rapidly. When the encirclement was narrowed to 500 to 600 miles, it would be the real close combat, the fiercest battle. The 10,000-plus elites were still charging forward, but the 50 high-level divine lords were the first to attack, using world-shaking divine abilities and ultimate skills. Sky Sea Raging Dragon Explosion, God-Slaying Sword in 10 steps, 8-directional God-Slaughtering Fist, Unparalleled Glass Palm, Waning Moon startles the heavens. The 50 high-level divine lords all used their ultimate killing moves with all their might. Instantly, a dazzling 5-color divine light illuminated the night sky for thousands of miles. Divine abilities of various shapes and sizes, carrying with them an overwhelming murderous intent, rained down on Tianqing and the others. The area became chaotic. Flames soared into the sky, thunder roared, lightning flashed, black clouds covered the sky, and hurricanes swept across. Faced with such a dangerous situation, Tianqing and the others didn't panic, their expressions unchanged. After all, they were already mentally prepared. No matter how many enemies there were, no matter how loud their charge was, they had sufficient confidence in Tianqing. As expected, Tianqing also made a prompt decision to attack. He formed a divine seal with both hands and used the heaven-destroying sword array, instantly connecting with the stars in the sky. Instantly, 25,000 streaks of starlight appeared in the pitch-black sky, raining down like a meteor shower. Those were 25,000 giant divine swords formed from the power of the stars in the sky, containing a divine might and sword intent that could suppress everything. Tianqing kept waving his hands, using divine Tao laws, adding dozens of nomological powers to the divine swords in the sky. Thus, when the 10,000 giant swords descended above their heads, they became even more extraordinarily powerful and indestructible. Swish, swish, swish. In a short span of time, the 25,000 giant divine swords enveloped an area of 1,000 miles, forming a giant sword net. Thousands of giant swords danced in the sky, releasing the most dazzling light. The divine abilities used by the 50 high-level divine lords were intercepted by the giant swords just as they reached the heads of Tianqing and the others. Rumble, boom, crack, bam, 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 bam. The giant swords clashed with the divine abilities, creating a deafening explosion that reverberated between heaven and earth. Countless divine abilities exploded, but the giant swords in the sky were unharmed. The shockwaves from the explosion carried with them countless fragments of divine light, spreading out in all directions. Tianqing and the others were the closest, so they bore the brunt of the impact. People like Bai Long and Zhan Hong were weaker, so they were easily injured by the shockwaves. But Tianqing was prepared. His body lit up with dazzling golden light, forming a giant shield that protected everyone within. No matter how the shockwave struck, the golden shield was undamaged, and everyone was safe and sound. Just like that, the first round of attacks from the 50 high-level divine lords was easily neutralized by Tianqing. The 10 commanders and the 50 high-level divine lords were all dumbfounded, shocked, and incredulous. This is the divine ability that he is best at, the one that is widely known, heavenly punishment. Lian Er frowned as he looked at the situation, his expression grave. Liang Jianqing nodded and said solemnly, "Back then, when he was dealing with the various sects, he used this move. Everyone knows that this divine ability sword formation is very powerful and can kill everything. But no one can break this sword formation, nor can they block the attacks of the sword formation. Imperial Army Governor Yi Liang and frowned and thought for a while. Then he said solemnly, "This bastard used the sword formation to seal off an area of 1,000 miles, trapping all of us in the sword formation. Could it be that he wants to use this heavenly punishment sword formation to kill all 13,000 of us?" Lian nodded and did not speak. Yi Liang, and in the four directions, divine generals' expressions changed drastically. They could not help but exclaim, "This is impossible. How can there be a monarch-level divine formation in the world that can kill 13,000 elite experts? Perhaps only the legendary king-level divine formation can do that. That bastard is not a divine king. So how can he kill all of us?" No one answered his question. Everyone's mood was very heavy. At this moment, the heaven-destroying sword formation was completely formed, and it sped up. 10,000 giant swords sealed off the area, forming a sword net. The other 15,000 giant swords crisscross in the air for thousands of miles, attacking the army. Chapter 3163. Under the bombardment of tens of thousands of swords, the world was in chaos, completely filled with sword light. The more than 10,000 elite experts were drowned by the sword lights before they could even use their divine spells to attack Ji Tianxing. Swish, 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 swish. Sharp piercing sounds continued to burst out. Under the attack of the 10,000 swords, blood splattered all over the sky. Those who were struck, pierced, or swept by the giant divine sword would have their limbs severed, while those who were heavily injured would explode into a rain of blood. For a moment, shrill screams and cries of near death, as well as angry curses, could be heard from all directions. In just 2 breaths of time, hundreds and thousands of experts had died tragically under the sword light, dying without a complete corpse. What was even more terrifying was that each of the giant swords seemed to have a life of their own as they slashed towards places with a lot of people. Tens of sword lights gathered together and formed a hurricane of sword blades, sweeping across the night sky without any fear. Anyone who was touched by the sword blade hurricane would be seriously injured even if they didn't die. Its power was terrifying. The army that had been full of confidence a moment ago was instantly stunned. Every single one of them was trembling with fear. Their hearts were filled with fear as they dodged and fled in panic. The attacking formation of the army was messed up, and a gap appeared in the huge encirclement. The morale of the army plummeted. Even though many lower and middle divine lords tried their best to block the giant sword and buy time for the heavenly gods to catch their breaths. However, this was futile. The might of each sword was comparable to an attack from a high divine lord. Those low-level and middle-level divine lords could not withstand the might of the enormous sword at all. Just like that, the 13,000-strong army was gradually routed, and their numbers quickly dwindled. They were still able to maintain their formation. Even though they were from the same faction, they risked their lives to gather together and work together to block the giant sword's attack. More than 10,000 people were divided into more than 30 groups, each fighting on their own without any order. Seeing this, Lian, Liang Jianxing, and Yi Liang and all frowned, their expressions turning even uglier. The problem that I was most worried about has finally appeared. The Lian face was very dark. He sighed and said in a low voice, "I already guessed it. Although these 13,000 people are elites, they come from different forces. They have not been trained or worked together, so there is no tacit understanding. It would be fine if he won the battle and sang loudly all the way. If there is emergency, it will be a mess like now." Liang Jianxing cursed as he blocked the giant swords. This sword formation covers 1,000 miles, and there are at least tens of thousands of giant swords. Why is the power of each giant sword so strong? Even we, high divine lords, are in a perilous situation. The slightest bit of carelessness, and we will be injured by the enormous sword. It was easy to imagine how those 13,000 people would be able to withstand the attack of the giant sword. How did that despicable bastard, Tianxing Master, such a terrifying skill. Yi Liang and was full of worry as he said in a low voice, "Sirs, the battle has just begun and the situation is already so dangerous. We can't just watch and do nothing. We have to take action. Only we can stop Tianqing. Even if we can't kill him, we can at least suppress him." The red-haired old monster of the three-star breaker elders grinned coldly and said, "Commander Yi, it's easy for you to say. We have already done our best to block the attack of the 10,000 swords. How can we suppress that bastard?" The other old monster with purple hair and the appearance of a 10-year-old child said in a strange tone, "The battle has just begun. Only 1,000 people have died, and you are already so panicked. If you feel so sorry for those trash, how about we just surrender? Let's see if that bastard Tianqing will let us go." These two people's words were quite harsh. Not only did they make Yi Liang's expression turn ugly, but the four divine generals also showed anger. It seemed that they were about to start arguing and fighting among themselves. At this moment, the Lian heir said in a dignified tone, "Cut the crap. Everyone has signed a military order for this operation. Either we die here or return victorious. No one can avoid it. The army's morale is weak. If this continues, they will definitely be defeated. Everyone, follow me. Do your best to restrain Tianqing." After saying that, the Lian heir took out two sabers and charged at Ji Tianqing. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang and did not hesitate. They each took out their divine weapons and charged with the Lian heir. Immediately after, the four divine generals also braved the sword rain and charged at Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. Only the three-star breaker elders remained where they were, stunned for a moment. The three of them looked at each other and revealed helpless expressions. They could only brace themselves and attack. When the 10 commanders charged in front of Ji Tianqing, they realized that Ji Tianqing and the others were fighting with many high-level divine lords in the sword rain. Of the 50 high-level divine lords, more than 30 were still blocking the sword rain and assisting the army in attacking. Only a dozen or so of them charged near Ji Tianqing and attacked from 100 miles away, creating pressure for Ji Tianqing and the others. Ji Tianqing controlled the heaven-destroying sword formation to attack the army while casting spells to block the attacks. Lin Shui, Blood Illusion, Zhan Hong, White Dragon, and the others stayed within Ji Tianqing's golden light shield and fought with the high-level divine lords around them. Even Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon left Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and joined the battle. They were all beside Ji Tianqing and were protected by the golden light shield. They used all kinds of divine powers and supreme skills to attack with all their might. Those high-level divine lords could not break the golden light shield at all, nor could they hurt Ji Tianqing and the others. Instead, it was the counterattacks of Ji Tianqing and the others that gave them a lot of pressure. They blocked the attacks of the giant swords and neutralized the divine powers of Ji Tianqing and the others. Soon, they showed signs of defeat and were all injured. Fortunately, Lian heir, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang and the others arrived in time and joined the battle. The Four Directions divine generals and the three Starbreakers also surrounded Ji Tianqing and the others and attacked. The 10 commanders all used their divine powers and supreme skills and released all kinds of powerful killing moves. They attacked Ji Tianqing and the others like a flood. Suddenly, the pressure on Ji Tianqing and the others increased greatly. Cracks appeared on the golden light shield, and it was in danger. As a result, the pressure on the high-level divine lords was greatly reduced. They hurriedly retreated a distance and took the opportunity to suppress their injuries and consume elixirs. Soon, 30 breaths of time passed. Ji Tianqing's golden light shield finally couldn't hold on any longer and exploded with a loud bang. Crack! The golden light shield shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. Without the protection of the shield, Lin Shui, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were in an extremely dangerous situation. Seeing this, Lian heir, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang and the others were overjoyed. They became more spirited and attacked even more crazily. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing made a decision and took out the Juqian Tenju Tower. Swish! The divine tower instantly expanded to 10,000 feet tall and released a mysterious black light that sucked everyone in. Only Ji Tianxing was left outside the divine tower. The attacks of the high-level divine lords landed on the divine tower and made a deafening sound, but it was not effective. Chapter 3164. The divine technique light that blotted out the sky, as well as the light of various mystical abilities, were unable to break through the divine tower's defenses. Ji Tianxing also used Endless Sky of Chaos, his body becoming transparent and blurry. The ultimate killing moves of numerous divine lords passed through him without any delay, scattering between heaven and earth, but he was completely unharmed. Seeing this scene, Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others were stunned again, revealing expressions of disbelief and anger. Damn it! Our divine abilities and consummate skills actually passed through his body? Are our eyes playing tricks on us? He's actually completely unharmed? This is too strange. Damn beast! What sorcery did he use? And that divine tower, it's protecting everyone. We must destroy it. That black tower's aura is very mysterious. It's definitely not an ordinary monarch-level divine artifact. Everyone must be careful. That little beast's strength is already ridiculously strong, and he grasps this kind of mystical ability. How are we going to kill him? Such a strange mystical ability. Who knows how long it can last? If it lasts for 15 minutes, it's still fine, but if he can last for 2 hours, then we'll be doomed. Everyone cried out in alarm, reminding each other to deal with it carefully. Especially the 3 elders Pashing. They were even more worried and anxious. Liang Jianqing's expression was dignified as he shouted coldly, "What are you all so anxious for? The facts have proven that our joint attack has already caused great pressure on that brat. He's strong, but that group of people around him are all trash, and they still need his protection. Now that that group of people have all hidden in the Black Tower, only that brat is left to fight alone. How long can he last? As long as we continue to attack and put pressure on him, he won't be able to control the sword formation. At that time, the sword formation's power will weaken, and an army of 10,000 will charge over, and his doomsday will come." After Liang Jianqing's analysis, the surrounding divine lord powerhouses were much more relieved, especially the other 30 or so divine lords. Another dozen or so people charged through the sword rain, charging near the Black Tower. In this way, the number of divine lords besieging Ji Tianxing reached as many as 42, although many were already injured and their battle prowess had weakened. However, they had so many people besieging Ji Tianxing. Of course, their morale was high, and they were full of confidence. Yiliang also shouted in high spirits. Everyone saw it. Previously, they were all talking about him as if he was a god, blowing that kid up to the sky. But in reality, no matter how powerful he is, he can only passively defend against us. Let's continue to attack and put more pressure on him. We'll be able to kill him soon. The Lian heir didn't say much. He waved his hand domineeringly and ordered, "Kill." Thus, the 42 high divine lords attacked together, unleashing powerful divine abilities and killing moves that rained down on Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged in the night sky, his hands forming a divine spell as he focused on controlling the heaven-destroying sword formation. He even ignored the divine light that blotted out the sun above his head. Swoosh! Swish, swish, swish. Divine abilities and supreme skills passed through him without any obstruction, scattering between heaven and earth without causing any ripples. A portion of the divine abilities and killing moves landed on the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda, exploding with earth-shattering sounds. However, they were useless. The divine pagoda stood motionless in the night sky, its surface covered with a layer of mysterious black light that made it indestructible. Although their attacks were useless, they weren't able to put any pressure on Ji Tianxing. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others were full of confidence, and they continued to attack without stopping. Time passed by slowly. In 20 breaths of time, They had launched more than 10 attacks. The result was, without a doubt, completely useless. Ji Tianxing was still sitting in the night sky, focused on controlling the sword formation, completely unaffected. Finally, the 3-star breakers realized that something was wrong. This is bad. The situation is bad. Everyone look. The sword formation seems to have become stronger again. Our army of more than 10,000. How come there are only so few people left? Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others were all focused on Ji Tianxing, ignoring the surrounding army. Hearing the exclamations of the 3-star breakers, everyone was startled awake. They turned their heads to look around, and only then did they realize that something was wrong. Within 100 li, the number and power of the giant swords were the same as before. There was no change. However, beyond 100 li, the giant swords that filled the sky became dazzling with rainbow colors, releasing sword energy that blotted out the sky and created countless sword-light hurricanes. The power of those giant divine swords was clearly twice as strong as before. Moreover, the power of laws contained in the giant swords had doubled. Looking around, there were sword-light hurricanes and sword rain in all directions, and they couldn't see anyone else at all. Even the screams and battle cries of the army had become indistinct and couldn't be heard clearly. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others immediately frowned, their expressions changing. So much time has passed. Why hasn't the army charged over yet? Damn it, that bastard is stalling for time, toying with us while increasing his strength to slaughter our army. What a treacherous bastard. He wants to stop the army from surrounding and wantonly slaughter our army before finally dealing with us. Reality was just as everyone had expected. The sword light and hurricanes that blotted out the sky obscured the surrounding scene. However, when everyone used their divine senses to observe, they could see the wretched scene on the battlefield. The powerful sword light and hurricanes that filled the sky were like raging waves, wildly swallowing up the surrounding army. Previously, the army had 12,000 people, divided into 30-some groups. But now, the army was left with only 9,000 or so, with only 20 groups remaining. Wherever the sword light and hurricanes passed, batch after batch of elite experts and low-level divine lords will be ground to dust, blood flying everywhere. Only those mid-level divine lords could barely last a few rounds before their divine bodies were ground to pieces by the sword light. While everyone was observing the battlefield, another 400-some people had died tragically to the sword light. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others had seen through Ji Tianxing's goal and were so angry that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. That damned bastard, he's a devil, an executioner. What are you all still standing around for? Go help the army block the sword array. Anyway, that kid used a divine ability and became transparent and blurry. We can't hurt him either. Why waste time with him? Yes, let's ignore him and go rescue the army. Let's see what he can do. The few commanders exchanged a few words and decided on a plan. However, the 3 elders Poxing raised an objection. We finally surrounded him with great difficulty. Are we really going to split up? Everyone, don't forget that the initiative is in that kid's hands. He's transparent now, but after we split up and go rescue the army, what if he returns to normal? He's slaughtering the army now. When we go rescue the army, he'll return to normal and kill us one by one. At that time, it'll be too difficult for us to gather together again. Hearing the 3 elders Poxing's words, the few commanders were also stunned for a moment, their faces revealing difficult expressions. Even the backbone of the group, Lian Er, was hesitant. He sighed with a bitter expression and said, "Sai, we're in a dilemma." Chapter 3165. The initiative was in Ji Tianxing's hands. The Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others were in a very passive situation. They could neither advance nor retreat. But Ji Tianxing was still slaughtering the army, and it was only getting more and more intense. As time passed, batch after batch of elite experts were reduced to a bloody mist by the sword lights and gales. The Lian Er and the others could not sit by and do nothing. They had to think of a way to resolve this situation. It was impossible to suppress or stop Ji Tianqing. No matter how they attacked, they could not affect Ji Tianqing. The only solution was to block the sword formation's power and protect the army around them. The Lian heir only hesitated for a few seconds before decisively making his decision. Protect the army with all your strength and block the sword formation's power. As his voice fell, the expressions and eyes of many higher divine lords dimmed. They all thought to themselves that they had known this would be the result. In the end, they still had to sacrifice themselves to protect the army. But they all knew that this was their only choice. They had to protect the army and work together with the army to block the sword formation's attack. The longer they could last, the greater their chances of victory. Once the sword formation's power weakened, or when Ji Tianqing could no longer maintain his transparent state, they would have a chance to turn the tide. Swish! The Lian heir was the first to retreat, flying toward a nearby group of elites. He brandished his two sabers and sent out saber images to block the sword formation's attack. This group of elites had more than 400 people. 90% of them were celestial gods, and only 30-some were divine lords. 6 mid-level divine lords and more than 20 low-level divine lords used all their strength to block the sword light and protect more than 400 experts. But the effect was minimal. They simply could not block the sword rain, and all of them were heavily injured. In just 100 seconds, more than half of the celestial gods had died, and 10 lower god lords had died. Even 3 middle god lords had been killed. This group of people was in despair. Their will to fight had completely disappeared, and they began to think of surrendering and fleeing. Fortunately, the Lian heir rushed over and helped them block the majority of the sword lights, greatly reducing the pressure on them. The rate at which this group of people died had clearly decreased by half. Only then did they recover and calm down a lot. Under the leadership of several middle-level divine lords, they joined forces to form a battle formation. They worked together to form a protective shield that blocked the sword rain that filled the sky. Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang En, and the dozens of higher divine lords were relieved when they saw that Lian heir had taken the lead in rescuing the army, and that the results were obvious. Everyone no longer hesitated and flew in all directions to rescue the army that had fallen into a desperate situation. Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang, and the 4 directions god generals and the 3 elders Pashing were all 8-stage realm upper-level god monarchs, and their abilities were the strongest. They could act alone and protect a team of 300 to 500 people. The other high divine lords did not have that kind of ability, so they formed groups of 2 or 3 and joined forces to protect a group. Very quickly, the various high divine lords finished their assignments. More than 50 high divine lords could only protect 26 teams, which was around 7,000 people. The remaining 8 teams, about 2,000 people, were all at the edge of the battlefield, far away. The numerous high divine lords were unable to take care of these people and could only resign themselves to fate. Very quickly, the difference became very obvious and obvious. Those 8 teams of 2,000 people only lasted for half an hour in the sword formation before they were all slaughtered. As for those 26 teams, they had the protection of many high divine lords, so the casualty rate was obviously much lower. After half an hour, only 1,000 people were seriously injured or dead. The battle situation had developed to this stage and was gradually stabilizing and easing up. Although Prince Lian's army had lost more than half and was only left with about 6,000 people, they still managed to stabilize themselves. They were no longer flustered and helpless. Their fighting spirit and confidence had recovered by quite a bit. They all had reason to believe that as long as they continued to persevere, the first person who could not hold on would definitely be Ji Tianqing. Whereas this army of theirs was like sand being washed away by the waves. Those who were left were all elites and true battle-hardened soldiers. Seeing that the power of the heaven-punishing sword formation had reached its peak, it was very difficult to raise it any further. Lian heir, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang En, and the others had other thoughts. They protected several teams and slowly brought them closer to the center of the sword formation. Lian heir's thoughts were very clear. He wanted to gather the army to the center of the sword formation and work together to kill Ji Tianxing. The other High Divine Lords also understood Lien Heir's intentions. Thus, they also did their best to protect the various teams and gradually rushed to the center of the sword formation. Seeing that the 26 teams were all slowly moving closer to Ji Tianxing, his situation gradually became more and more dangerous. According to the speed of the various teams, they would be able to complete the encirclement in at most 15 minutes. At that time, the 26 teams would work together to block the sword rain and surround Ji Tianxing, and he would be powerless to reverse the situation. Of course, this was only what everyone was thinking. They simply could not imagine that Ji Tianxing was invincible below the Divine King level. He could use infinite sky of chaos for long periods of time and maintain a transparent state, becoming one with the world. Whether it was 6 to 10 hours or a day, this army would not be able to harm him. But he did not want to do that and stall for time with Lien Heir and the others. Even if the 26 teams surrounded him, they would not be able to injure him. But if the army worked together to block the sword formation's attack, the effect would be more significant, and the rate of casualties would be further reduced. Originally, Ji Tianxing might only need 2 hours to end this battle and slaughter the army. If the 26 teams were to surround him, it would take him 4 hours, 6 hours, or even 10 hours to finish the battle. This place was very close to the raging flame royal city, and the longer the battle dragged on, the more variables there would be. Ending the battle quickly was the right way. Thus, Ji Tianxing ended the infinite sky of chaos state, and his body returned to normal. He no longer controlled the heaven-destroying sword formation and allowed it to operate on its own. Under such circumstances, the power of the sword formation would be halved, but he did not need to divert his attention to control the sword formation and could focus on dealing with Lien Heir and the others. Whoosh! A white light flashed. Ji Tianxing instantly teleported 800 miles and appeared behind the team. He clenched his left hand into a fist and punched out a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom, while his right hand swung the Burial of Heaven and slashed out a giant sword that was 10,000 meters long. There were only 200 people left in this team, and most of them were injured and covered in blood. They looked very wretched. 3 high-level divine lords worked together to protect this team. They were constantly breaking through the sword light blockade and rushing toward the center of the sword formation. They did not expect Ji Tianxing to suddenly attack. When the dragon elephant phantom arrived and the giant sword descended, it was too late for this team to dodge. Boom! There was a deafening sound as the dragon elephant phantom struck the crowd and blasted a huge hole in the formation. At least 40 experts were blasted into pieces by the dragon elephant divine fist and exploded into a bloody mist. Then, the giant sword that was 10,000 meters long slashed down and split the team in two. 2 mid-level divine lords, 4 low-level divine lords, and more than 50 divine realm experts were also blasted into pieces by the giant sword and died on the spot. Chapter 31:66. In the blink of an eye, the number of people in this team was reduced by nearly half. Such berserk power caused the others to be extremely alarmed, subconsciously retreating and fleeing. Only at this time did the other teams realize that the situation was not good. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was no longer in the center of the sword formation and started killing the army and destroying heaven and earth the moment he attacked, the various teams were filled with grief, indignation, and shock. Under the lead of many high-ranked divine lords, the various teams gathered at a faster speed. They were very smart and did not rescue this team that was attacked, nor did they charge at Ji Tianxing, because they knew that it was all futile. They could not stop Ji Tianxing at all. The most sensible thing to do was for all the teams to gather as soon as possible. At that time, it would not be so easy for Ji Tianxing to kill them again. Ji Tianxing naturally understood this point as well. Therefore, his mood was also very urgent, speeding up the pace of his attack. Starry River Break. Ji Tianxing gave a cold cry, holding the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands, slashing out a resplendent sword light that was 100 miles long. The sword light was like a starry river, sweeping across the night sky, engulfing the entire team, only to hear muffled bangs continuously erupting. The 100 or so elites who were lucky enough to survive were reduced to ashes on the spot. Even the 3 high-ranked divine lords protecting this team had their divine bodies destroyed by the starry sword, fleeing into the distance with only their divine sparks remaining. Ji Tianxing did not pursue. In any case, those 3 divine sparks could not escape the sword formation and were destined to fall here. He teleported another 300 miles and appeared above another team. That team had more than 300 people, protected by 2 high-ranked divine lords, still desperately rushing toward the center of the sword formation, wanting to join up with the other teams. After Ji Tianxing appeared, his right hand waved the sword and stabbed out several hundred light blades, instantly killing more than 60 elites. His left palm accumulated 100% power, striking out a mountain-sized golden dragon palm, ruthlessly smashing into the crowd, only to hear a loud boom explode. The crowd was smashed into pieces. Another 100 elites exploded and died, turning into a bloody mist that filled the sky. Ji Tianxing only used 2 moves to kill more than half of the team. Such a terrifying might caused the remaining people to be horrified. They let out terrified roars and fled in all directions in panic. However, those fleeing elites were quickly turned into dregs by the sword rain that filled the sky. The dozen over-divine lord powerhouses that were lucky enough to survive were also caught up by Ji Tianxing and killed one by one. After dealing with this team, Ji Tianxing rushed towards another team and used the same trick to deal with more than 200 elites. Even though that group also had 2 high-level divine lords protecting them, they were practically useless. Ji Tianxing only used 3 breaths of time to execute 4 divine abilities and consummate skills to wipe out the entire team. Even the 2 high divine lords protecting that team were killed by him on the spot, their godhead shattered. Following that, he continuously killed one team after another, sweeping away all obstacles, no one able to stop him. Seeing this scene, Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang'en, and the rest all felt chills all over their bodies, filled with despair. Damn it, the other teams can't withstand his charge at all. Oh, Hao Yin, how can that beast be strong to such an extent? Just who can deal with him? Everyone, speed up. We have to gather no matter the cost. Only by gathering together can we resist him. Otherwise, we'll only be killed off one by him. The Starbreaker 3 elders were also busy until they were drenched in sweat, their appearances very wretched. Seeing Ji Tianxing wreaking havoc everywhere, continuously exterminating one team after another, the 3 people all started roaring with a bellyful of indignation. We said before previously that we absolutely can't split up. We'll definitely be defeated one by one. You guys still didn't believe it. Do you believe it now? The initiative is in his hands. We're in a passive position from start to finish. Previously, the army had 1,000 to 2,000 people killed, and you guys were in a hurry to rescue them. Now, more than half of the army has been lost. Soon, the entire army will be wiped out. Are you satisfied? You don't listen to the advice of your elders, and you'll be at a disadvantage soon. This old man reminded you before. It's your fault for being so obstinate, resulting in this situation. The Starbreaker 3 elders' complaints made everyone even more vexed. The elites of the various teams were already at a loss for what to do and were filled with shock. When they heard the Starbreaker 3 elders' words, they were even more terrified and despaired. Their fighting spirit collapsed. Finally, 15 minutes passed. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang'en, and the rest covered the various teams and completed the encirclement at the center of the sword formation. Only 12 teams were able to successfully arrive, and there were only about 3,000 people. As for the other 14 teams, close to 3,000 elites, they were all wiped out by Ji Tianxing. The 12 teams that were lucky enough to survive all appeared very panicked and anxious. After gathering, Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the rest hurriedly commanded everyone to form a battle formation and work together to conjure up a shield. In order to protect everyone, Lian Er and Yi Liang and even took out a few high-grade divine artifacts. But all of this was futile. After Ji Tianxing finished off the 14 teams, he turned and flew to the center of the sword formation and began to deal with Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the rest. More than 40 high-level divine lords and 3,000 elites worked together to form a super-large battle formation and conjure up 3 layers of divine light shields. But Ji Tianxing was not worried at all. He methodically controlled the heaven-vanquishing sword formation to attack this battle formation. A total of 15,000 giant swords were concentrated in this area of 100 miles, bombarding the 5-colored light shield indiscriminately. Whoosh! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Boom! Boom, 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 boom. More than 10,000 giant swords rained down like a torrential rain, fiercely striking the 5-colored light shield and exploding with deafening sounds. Instantly, the divine light shield within 100 miles trembled incessantly from the bombardment and was on the verge of collapse. The battle formation formed by 3,000 people was also on the verge of collapse and was in a perilous situation. In a short span of 10 breaths, the outermost layer of the divine light shield was smashed to pieces with cracking sounds. The expressions of Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the 3,000 elites changed dramatically, revealing looks of anxiety and fear. Soon, another span of 10 breaths passed. The second layer of light shield, formed by the 3,000 people, was also smashed to pieces. The last layer of light shield seemed exceptionally weak and powerless. The 3,000 elites revealed looks of despair and extreme grief. Boom, 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 boom. The 15,000 giant swords once again launched a barrage of attacks, exploding with deafening booms that shook the heavens. In less than 10 breaths, the third layer of light shield was also smashed, sending billions of shards flying everywhere. At this point, the 3,000 elites had lost the protection of the light shield and were exposed to the rain of swords. When the endless giant swords rained down, everyone revealed a look of despair and let out unwilling roars. Boom, boom, boom. The next moment, the rain of swords enveloped the battle formation and drowned the 3,000 elites. The high-quality divine artifacts of Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others were immediately smashed to pieces. The huge battle formation was also torn apart, and a huge gap appeared. At least 400 people were smashed to pieces and turned to dust under the first wave of the rain of swords. But this was only the beginning of the disaster. Chapter 31:67. They watched as batch after batch of elite disciples disappeared under the onslaught of the huge swords that filled the sky. The Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangen, and the others were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They knew that with their strength, they could not protect the 3,000 elites. The more passive they were, the more desperate they would be and the more they would die. If they went all out and fought back, they might still have a chance at survival. Everyone, give up on defending and attack with me. Even if we die here, we will not allow ourselves to be slaughtered. Lian Er raised his arms and shouted loudly, fiercely strengthening his heart. His tone was full of solemn and stirring feeling. Dozens of high-level divine lords resonated with him, feeling the same way as he did. They all opened their mouths in agreement. As for the 2,000 elites, they had basically been abandoned. In the heaven-vanquishing sword formation, they had no ability to protect themselves or fight back. So it did not matter what they did. Kill. Everyone, let's charge together. Even if we die, we have to drag him down with us. The Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others roared at the top of their lungs. More than 40 upper divine lords and more than 100 middle divine lords followed them, brandishing their swords and sabers as they charged at Ji Tianxing through the rain of swords. Yet, Ji Tianxing used the same trick again and ignored everyone's attacks. He used the infinite sky of turbidity's secret technique and became one with the world, his body becoming transparent. More than 100 divine lord experts released divine powers that blotted out the sun. They passed through him without any resistance and scattered across the world, unable to harm him at all. Instead, he focused on controlling the sword formation, releasing its strongest power and quickly slaughtering the 2,000 elites. Many lower divine lords and celestial god experts exploded one after another under the dense rain of giant swords, turning into a bloody mist. 2,500, 2,200, 1,800, 1,500, 1,200 as time passed. The number of people on the battlefield rapidly decreased, and the bloody mist in the night sky became thicker and thicker. Soon, 100 breaths of time passed. The number of lower divine lords and heavenly gods had decreased to around 300. All of them were covered in blood and did not look like humans anymore. Lien Er, Liang Jianqing, and more than 40 high divine lords had used all their strength to besiege Ji Tianqing for so long, but to no avail. Everyone was in complete despair. The Lien Er and many of the higher divine lords gave up on attacking and focused on defending against the sword rain. An army of 13,000 was completely annihilated by him. He single-handedly slaughtered more than 10,000 soldiers, and he was completely unharmed. There has never been such a monster in the great Yin Empire in the past 10,000 years. He is not a divine monarch. He was definitely an unparalleled divine king. Apart from divine king powerhouses, who else can be so heaven-defying? Why is this happening? We have more than 10,000 elites, and we have prepared for so long. Why are we still defeated? He. We're all going to die here. None of us will survive. If he doesn't give us a way out, then let's perish together. Many of the higher divine lords roared and cursed angrily, and they sneered in despair. Many of them had even made up their minds to self-detonate and perish together with Ji Tianqing. Of course, this was just their wishful thinking. There were still more than 300 people alive. If they self-detonated, they might not be able to kill Ji Tianqing, but they would definitely blow up all their companions. And at this time, Ji Tianqing also stopped attacking. Under the control of his mind, those 15,000 giant swords floated in the night sky, arranged in a sword formation and as dense as rain. The tips of the swords were all pointed downwards, pointing at the 300 or so lucky survivors. The formless sword intent locked onto everyone's auras, causing them to feel chills all over as they were enveloped by the cold air of death. Ji Tianqing looked down at Lien Er, Liang Jianqing, and the others, and said expressionlessly, "Now that things have come to this, you've already lost. What's the point of fighting like cornered beasts?" Hearing this, the 3-star breakers immediately sneered. "Brat, we admit that you're very strong and unfathomable. We've lost, but we have to die with dignity. Don't even think about humiliating us. You bastard will fight to the last moment and shed our last drop of blood. Are you trying to persuade us to surrender? Stop dreaming. Even if we surrender, you won't let us go. Since we're going to die either way, we'd rather die with dignity." On the surface, the 3-star breakers sounded like they were unyielding and full of sorrow. But Ji Tianqing frowned and sneered disdainfully. "You 3 long-haired freaks have long since grown timid and want to surrender and run, but you're pretending to be righteous. How laughable." Having their intentions exposed, the 3-star breakers immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and began to curse. Ji Tianqing couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. In any case, the 3-star breakers were already dead in his eyes. His gaze fell on Lien Er and Liang Jianqing, and he said expressionlessly, "Of the 2 of you, one is Prince Lien's trusted aide, and the other is the sect master of the Heavenly Harmony sect and the Raging Flame branch. Everyone else has to die, but the 2 of you, as long as you surrender, this Lord can spare your lives." Suddenly hearing these words, the 40-plus high divine lords and the 300-plus elites all revealed expressions of shock, jealousy, anger, and unwillingness. Many people were roaring in their hearts. Why do you want to kill us, but let the 2 of them go? No matter how unresigned they were, they also understood the reason. Lien Er and Liang Jianqing had special statuses. To Ji Tianqing, they still had some value. As for the others, they were like ants. If he killed them, then so be it. The 40-plus high divine lords and the 300-plus elites were thus sentenced to death. The outcome was irreversible. They knew that they would undoubtedly die, so they dispelled all their delusions and extravagant hopes. With the mentality of perishing together, they instead became even more united, their wills as strong as an impregnable fortress. When Lian Er and Liang Jianqing heard Ji Tianxing's words, they didn't become excited. Instead, they righteously berated, "Dog thief, don't even think about sowing discord. We live and die together, advance and retreat together. Bastard, don't even think about using us to threaten and murder the young prince. Even if we die, we won't fall into your hands, and we definitely won't cause trouble for the young prince." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered, "The two of you are rather loyal, but I don't know if it's true or false. How about this? This lord will kill the others first, then have a good chat with the two of you." Hearing these words, the other 300-plus people became even more indignant, so angry that they almost vomited blood. Everyone was thinking that they were still alive, so Lian Er and Liang Jianqing pretended to be very loyal, righteously refusing to surrender. Once Ji Tianxing killed them all, Lian Er and Liang Jianqing wouldn't have to worry about anything. They would definitely surrender without any dignity. For a moment, the 300-plus people glared angrily at Lian Er and Liang Jianqing, developing hostility towards them. Whether it was because of jealousy, hatred, or unwillingness, this group of people was divided. Lian Er was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He could only use death to show his sincerity and recklessly charge at Ji Tianxing. "Dog thief, I'll fight you to the death." Chapter 3168. The Lian heir led the army this time as a representative of Prince Lian and shouldered a heavy responsibility. The others could admit defeat and surrender, but he could not. If he surrendered to Ji Tianxing, he would be trampling on Prince Lian's face. Since he couldn't win, the Lian heir would rather die in battle, and he wanted to die tragically and heroically. This way, even if he died, Prince Lian would confer him a posthumous title and reward him, and treat his family well. If he surrendered and survived, the fate of his family could be imagined. Given Prince Lian's personality, he would definitely execute his entire family to vent his hatred and resentment. Bastard die. The Lian heir transformed into a streak of light that pierced through the night sky, charging in front of Ji Tianxing and slashing down with his twin sabers. "You're courting death." Ji Tianxing frowned slightly, then expressionlessly raised his right hand and swept out with his sword. It was just a casual sweep of the sword, seemingly without any order. But his attainments in the sword Dao had long reached the pinnacle. Every move he made contained the true intent of the sword Dao and the power of multiple laws. Boom! With a dull explosion, the two dazzling saber lights exploded into pieces. The Lian heir was also sent flying, vomiting blood as he crashed 100 miles away. Even though Ji Tianxing was the same as him, both being 8th level divine Lord Realm strength. But the difference in their combat strength was huge, at least 10 times greater. Even if the Lian heir used all his strength, he could not block Ji Tianxing's casual strike. Seeing the Lian heir sent flying with a single move and heavily injured, everyone trembled with fear, chills running down their spines. The dozens of high-ranked divine lords were all pondering. The Lian heir and Liang Jianqing were the strongest among them, but they could not block a single move from Ji Tianxing. If it were them, they would probably be insta-killed by Ji Tianxing. As a result, many high-ranked divine lords were nervous. But the Lian heir had already attacked. They could not just stand there and watch, so they could only brace themselves and charge. Kill. Everyone attack together. I would rather die standing than live kneeling. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liangin both roared loudly. With hearts full of solemn and stirring feelings, they launched an attack on Ji Tianxing. The two of them attacked from the left and right, brandishing their divine swords and using their ultimate killing moves. Limitless Sword Ripple, Sky-Splitting Sun Chop. Even though the two of them had given it their all and unleashed their strongest killing moves, the two of them were unable to stop each other. The giant sword that was thousands of feet long and had hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Its power was indeed astonishing. However, their sword Dao divine abilities paled in comparison to Ji Tianxing's. Ji Tianxing put his left hand behind his back and held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. In an instant, 36 sword lights shot out. Sun-shattering sword. 36 rainbow-colored sword lights instantly destroyed the giant's sword and the hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Bang! 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 Muffled explosions could be heard as fragments of divine light rained down from the sky. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang were both hit by a few swords. Blood spurted out from their bodies as they screamed and flew backward for dozens of miles. Ji Tianxing used only one move to heavily injure Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang. Such divine might cause the 40-plus high divine lords to be even more terrified and fearful. But the crowd had already followed Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang, and roaring as they launched an attack. He couldn't give up halfway, right? Everyone had no choice but to grit their teeth and unleash all their divine abilities to besiege him. Swish! Swish! Everyone was using all kinds of divine abilities and consummate skills. Dazzling divine light shot out and covered the sky. The saber light and sword shadows that filled the sky were like a torrential flood, pouring down on Ji Tianxing and drowning his figure. At this moment, the 15,000 giant swords floating in the night sky emitted a dazzling light and stabbed down at the crowd. Swish! 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 Violent sword intent enveloped the 40-plus high divine lords. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! There was an earth-shattering explosion as the divine abilities and consummate skills that everyone had used were shattered by the sword light. Immediately after, the dense rain of sword light blasted into the crowd, drowning the figures of many high divine lords. The high divine lords who had been charging forward bravely without regard for their own safety were instantly scattered by the rain of sword light and fled pathetically. However, fleeing and dodging were useless. The area within 100 miles was completely filled with sword light. There was nowhere to run. Blood mist burst out from the crowd, and shrill screams could be heard. One after another, high divine lords had their limbs and divine bodies severed by the sword light before exploding into clouds of bloody mist. Even the godheads that were fleeing in panic could not escape the fate of being killed by the sword light. They were all shattered into pieces. The number of high divine lords was rapidly dwindling. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liang were also severely injured and were powerless to reverse the situation. Not far away, the 300-plus elites watched with trepidation. Their souls almost left their bodies, and they were in extreme despair. Many people lost their will to fight as their willpower collapsed. They could no longer fight as they fled in all directions in a frenzy, letting out indistinct and horrified roars. Soon, misfortune befell them. More than 2,000 giant swords flew over, forming a dozen sword blade storms that swept through the crowd. Anyone who was swept up by the storm, regardless of whether they were 9th-level celestial gods or low-level divine lords, was smashed into pieces and their godhead shattered. In less than 100 breaths, the 300-plus elites were all killed by the sword light. Not a single one was left. And at this moment, more than half of the 40-plus high divine lords were killed by the 10,000 swords. Only a dozen or so high divine lords were left, and they were still resisting, struggling to hold on. These dozen or so people were the strongest and most powerful among the many experts. They included Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang, and the 4 directions divine generals and the 3 elders Pashing. However, the 13 high divine lords were all covered in blood. Their hair was disheveled, and they were severely injured. They looked very wretched. The high divine lords with the worst injuries had their arms or legs cut off. One of them was almost cut in half at the waist. At this point, the battle was about to end. No matter how the 13 high divine lords erupted or what trump cards they used, they could not change the outcome of their deaths. And Ji Tianxing was still completely unharmed. The heaven-destroying sword formation was still intact, operating firmly and powerfully. 7 Stars Sword. While a High Divine Lord was blocking the sword rain, Ji Tianqing appeared behind him and stabbed repeatedly with his sword. With a muffled explosion, the High Divine Lord did not even have the chance to scream before his divine body was destroyed. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The others were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They all charged at Ji Tianqing and attacked with all their might. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed, and he teleported behind a High Divine Lord and stabbed rapidly with his sword. Bam! The Burial of Heaven sword instantly stabbed into the High Divine Lord's back. A dazzling divine light burst out and blasted him into smithereens. A godhead flew out from the bloody mist and instinctively fled into the distance. Ji Tianqing swung his sword again and chopped the godhead into pieces. Just like that, one High Divine Lord after another was killed by Ji Tianqing. When a few High Divine Lords died one after another, and the 3 Elders Pashing were also killed, only the 4 Directions Divine General, Liang Jianqing, Yiliang Un, and Lian Er were left. The crowd finally could not hold on any longer. Lian Er and Liang Jianqing looked at each other and used all their strength to self-destruct. Chapter 3169. The Lian Er and Liang Jianqing had been forced into a corner and could only self-detonate. Other than that, they could not think of any other way to hurt Ji Tianqing. The 2 of them lit up with dazzling divine light as their divine bodies shook violently, emitting a dangerous aura that could destroy heaven and earth. Yiliang and the 4 Directions Divine Generals were shocked to see this, and their expressions became extremely complicated. They instinctively wanted to retreat and persuade the Lian Er and Liang Jianqing. However, they were well aware of the situation. Self-detonation would kill them, but not self-detonation would still kill them. Since they were going to die either way, they might as well self-detonate. They might even be able to hurt Ji Tianqing and destroy this damned sword formation. Thus, the 4 Directions Divine Generals and Yiliang and also made up their minds and self-detonated at the same time. When they ignited their godheads, blood flames soared from their bodies, and their bodies shook violently, emitting an incomparably violent aura. Everyone was in great pain, and they were filled with anger and hatred. They glared at Ji Tianqing and let out angry roars. Bastard, you forced us to do this. Brat, let's welcome death together. Even if we die, we'll drag you down with us. Let's go to hell together. Ha ha. It looked like the 7 high-level divine lords were about to self-detonate. When that happened, the entire heaven-vanquishing sword formation would be destroyed, and everything within 100,000 miles would be razed to the ground. At this critical juncture, Ji Tianqing made a choice that left everyone dumbfounded. He unleashed his strongest power and used the heaven-capturing dragon claw to grab the Lian Er. Swoosh! The golden dragon claw instantly grabbed the swollen Lian Er and pulled him in front of Ji Tianqing. What was even more incredible was that Ji Tianqing's unparalleled divine power actually sealed the Lian Er. He forcibly suppressed the Lian Er's self-detonation. Then, he used his divine consciousness to control the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and deactivated it. Shwa! With a flash of light, the 25,000 sword lights of the heaven-destroying sword formation, which had covered 1,000 miles, disappeared without a trace. That was not all. Ji Tianqing swung the sword of Burial of Heaven and used an ultimate technique. Rising Dragon Slash. He brazenly swung his sword and slashed out a golden dragon shadow between him, the 4 Directions Godly Generals, Liang Jianqing and Yiliang, and the 100-mile-long sword light that looked like a golden dragon tore through the night sky and split the area into 2. A huge spatial crack appeared between the 2. The 2 of them were clearly 200 miles apart, but they were in different spaces. Liang Jianqing, Yiliang Un, and the 4 Directions Divine Generals were all dumbfounded. They simply couldn't believe that Ji Tianqing was actually able to slash through the night sky and create a huge spatial rift. It can even cut through space. Just how powerful is he? Only a godly king expert can cut through the void. Looks like we were right. He is really a godly king expert. No wonder. We didn't lose for nothing. The six Sir Gods exclaimed and exclaimed. They had mixed feelings. However, they didn't have time to think. In the next moment, they suddenly exploded, turning into six balls of dazzling light that were like the scorching sun, blooming with the most dazzling colors in the night sky. That was the most dazzling moment in their lives. It was also the last moment. Boom, 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 boom. 6 consecutive earth-shattering explosions were heard. It was like a super loud sound that reverberated in the sky. Boundless divine flames and light spread out in all directions, engulfing everything in its path. The ground within a 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground and dust was stirred up. However, the shockwave that was aimed at Ji Tianqing was blocked by the spatial crack after it spread for 100 miles. The destructive shockwave rushed out of the spatial crack and into the vast void. Of course, the spatial crack was only 100 miles wide. It was like a 100-mile-long chasm. Even more 5-colored shockwaves swept across from other places, illuminating the night sky as bright as day. A 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground. Ji Tianqing stood next to the spatial crack. The area within a 100-mile-long radius around him was calm and very safe. The Lian heir's self-detonation was suppressed. His godhead was heavily damaged, and more than half of his body was burned. He was on the verge of death. However, he was still conscious. He witnessed this scene with his own eyes and was extremely shocked. It was so shocking that he almost lost his ability to think. His mind was blank. There was only one word left. It's over. The 13,000-strong army was completely annihilated. He was the only survivor, but he had fallen into Ji Tianqing's hands. His life was no longer in his own hands. He wasn't worried about his own safety. After all, he would die in the end. What he was more worried about was that the self-detonation of so many Sir Gods would destroy everything within a 100-mile-long radius. And Raging Flame Royal City was 150,000 miles to the south. If the shockwave swept through Raging Flame Royal City, the consequences would be unimaginable. The destructive shockwaves spread until they were 100,000 miles away before their power gradually weakened. When they were 150,000 miles away, the 5-colored shockwaves gradually dissipated. From the explosion point to the north, there were mountains and valleys for hundreds of thousands of miles. Now, they had all been razed to the ground and turned into ruins. And to the south, there were flat grasslands all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City. There is no doubt that the hundreds of thousands of miles of plains had also been flattened, and the earth had been shaved off nearly 100,000 feet. The destructive shockwaves spread all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City and gradually dissipated when they were about to reach the city walls. The Great City Protection Array in the north of Raging Flame Royal City was affected by the shockwaves and automatically activated. In the brightly lit royal city, countless people saw the divine light that covered the sky and the earth, the power that could destroy the world. Countless people were frightened. They screamed and shouted in horror, and some even prepared to run away. For a moment, the originally quiet Raging Flame Royal City became lively. Countless people walked out of their homes and onto the streets, looking up at the night sky in the north and discussing spiritedly. The ordinary people didn't know what was going on. That boundless divine light didn't seem to be the result of a great battle between experts. After all, no one could release such a terrifying divine light. Therefore, many people guessed that it was some kind of anomaly or some kind of omen. And in the royal palace of Raging Flame Royal City, when the king of Raging Flame heard the news, his face darkened on the spot, and his eyes flashed with deep hatred and disappointment. He was well aware that it wasn't some kind of anomaly, but the self-destruction of a divine lord. Moreover, the self-destruction of a divine lord couldn't have such great power. It must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords at the same time. The answer was obvious. He had already guessed that Yi Liang and the Four Directions divine generals and the experts of the royal palace wouldn't be able to come back. Moreover, the shockwaves of the self-destruction had spread for hundreds of thousands of miles and the 13,000 troops would definitely have died. However, after the grief and anger, there was only one question left in his mind. The power of the self-destruction was so terrifying. That bastard Tianxing should be dead, right? If they died together, the sacrifice of the 13,000 troops would be worth it. Chapter 3170. Outside the palace. Inside the resplendent palace. This time, Prince Lien wasn't in the secret chamber. He was standing on the roof of the palace, silently gazing at the northern night sky. The cold wind whistled, blowing his long hair and gold-threaded black robe back and forth. Two attendants dressed in black stood quietly behind him. Even though the overwhelming divine power shock wave had dissipated a long time ago, Prince Lien still stood on the roof of the palace. But Prince Lien stood motionless on the roof and continued to stare at the northern night sky without saying a word. King City was bustling with noise and excitement. Everywhere was brightly lit, and people were moving about. Prince Lien wasn't affected at all. He muttered to himself, "Lien Air, Liang Jianqing, and the 13,000 people have completed their mission. The battle is over. I still lost." Prince Lien's voice was low, cold, and solemn, with a hint of exhaustion and self-mockery. But he was strangely calm. He didn't get angry or curse. Perhaps he had already predicted the outcome of tonight's battle. Or maybe he had been defeated by Ji Tianxing for so long that he was numb to it. The two attendants behind him hurriedly comforted Prince Lien. "Don't worry, Your Highness. The destructive shock wave must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords. Although Second Brother and Sect Leader Liang have sacrificed themselves, their sacrifice was worth it. But their sacrifice was worth it. That D*MN beast Tianxing must have been killed by the explosion. Your Highness, I've already sent a spy to Celestial Dragon Mountain to investigate. Please wait for a moment. We'll have the results and news soon." The status and position of these two attendants were both lower than Lien Air, but they were also Prince Lien's confidants. His personal guards were named Lien San and Lien Si respectively. Prince Lien shook his head and said calmly, "No need to wait. I've already guessed the result. If Lien Air and Liang Jianqing could really kill Tianxing, why would they self-destruct? Besides, I know Tianxing's strength and prowess better than anyone else. Even if he withstood the shockwave of the explosion, he would at most be slightly injured. He definitely won't die." Lien San and Lien Si looked at each other, both showing worry and anxiety. But when they saw Prince Lien so pessimistic and depressed, they didn't know how to console him. At this time, Grand Prince Lien looked up at the night sky again and said in a sorrowful tone, "The 9 great sects are gone, and the elites of the Hetian sect branch are all dead. Even the Imperial Army under Chang Yi's command suffered heavy casualties, their strength greatly reduced. This king spent 20 years to develop this situation and secretly control this divine kingdom. But now, there is nothing left. Tianxing, he really is this king's old enemy." Grand Prince Lien closed his eyes and heaved a long sigh. His tone was filled with hatred and unwillingness. Both Lien San and Lien Si could see that Prince Lien was extremely sad and indignant, but he had no choice but to suppress his emotions and try his best to remain calm. If he kept it bottled up in his heart and couldn't find an outlet, it would be easy for problems to arise. Thus, the two of them hurriedly advised, "Your Highness, the night wind is cold here. You should return to the hall to wait and rest." "Your Highness, we've only suffered a temporary setback. When you recover, that brat will definitely be executed." As they spoke, the two of them supported Prince Lien on his left and right and were about to return to the hall to rest. However, Prince Lien shook them off and sneered with anger. "This king's injuries have mostly recovered. Do I still need you to support me? Am I that weak?" The two of them hurriedly bowed and apologized. Prince Lien didn't pursue the matter and said expressionlessly, "No need to rest. Go pack up and gather all the attendants. We should leave." "Now, leave this palace?" Lien Si was startled, his face full of surprise. Lien Sin thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. "The defensive power of this palace is much weaker than before. It's weakened by several times. Now that all the forces under your highness's command have been destroyed, we have no one to use. Only within the palace, there is still a large number of experts protecting it. Only then will your highness be safe. Lien Si finally understood and hurriedly agreed. That's right. Then I'll go gather the attendants now. Seeing that the two of them had misunderstood, Prince Lien frowned and said in a deep voice, "You two idiots. When did I say we're going to the palace? With the few men under Chang'e, if Qianqing really wants to kill his way into the capital, can they stop him? I'm asking you to gather the attendants and pack up. We're leaving the capital." In his anger, Prince Lien spoke more bluntly. The meaning of these words was that they were going to pack up and run away. Lien San and Lien Si were surprised and puzzled. They muttered in their hearts, "It can't be like this, right? Is it really that serious?" After hesitating for a moment, Lien San asked tentatively, "Your Highness, where should we go after we leave the raging flame capital? Don't tell me you're going back to the capital?" Prince Lien turned to glare at him and scolded. "Why would I go back to the capital? To let those bastards see me as a joke. I'm going to the heavenly sect. My injuries haven't healed, so I need to recuperate in seclusion." The heavenly sect he was talking about was the headquarters of the great Yin Empire. As for injuries haven't healed and need to recuperate, it was an excuse. His injuries were clearly 80% healed. Lien San and Lien Si completely understood Prince Lien's meaning. They did not say anything else and hurriedly carried out the order. Prince Lien was still standing on the roof, looking coldly at the night sky in the north. He stood there for a long time before he turned and left. The Sky Dragon Mountain from before had long ceased to exist. The area within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles had long been turned into deep pits and ruins. After the shock wave of the self-detonation ended, Ji Tianqing was unscathed. Lien Er's self-detonation had been suppressed. His divine body and godhead were sealed, and he could not move like a stone statue. Ji Tianqing carried him in his hand and patrolled the battlefield, plundering a small amount of spoils. Most of the spoils were destroyed by the shock wave of the self-detonation. In the end, only about 30 spatial rings, more than 10 pieces of high-grade monarch equipment, and dozens of godhead fragments were left. These items were scattered near the spatial rift and had not been affected by the explosion. What a pity! The spatial rings and equipment of more than 13,000 people must be worth hundreds of millions. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows and sighed inwardly. Fortunately, the spatial rings, divine weapons, and godhead fragments he had obtained were all from the high-grade divine lords. Although there were not many of them, they were still valuable. After putting away the spoils, he carried Lien Er and flew into the night sky. Soon, he disappeared into the horizon. He did not continue south, nor did he directly attack Monarch City. This was because he had kept Lien Er alive for the time being. There was still a big use for him. For hours later, Ji Tianqing flew 200,000 miles away and hid in a remote mountain range. He began to interrogate Lien Er. Lien Er was Prince Lien's absolute confidant and knew a lot of information and secrets. Ji Tianqing wanted to learn more about Prince Lien through this person. Chapter 3171. The Lien Er was very loyal to Prince Lien, and he was unyielding. No matter how Ji Tianqing interrogated him, he kept his mouth shut and didn't reveal a single word. When Ji Tianqing saw this, he wasted no more time and killed the Lien Er. Then, he took out the Lien Er's godhead and circulated his energy to refine it, stripping the memories from his soul. This method was simple and crude, but it had its drawbacks as well. Directly refining the memories from the godhead was often incomplete. There would be many omissions. Moreover, the Lien Er was already heavily injured. He had even ignited his godhead and self-detonated. Although his self-detonation had been suppressed by Ji Tianqing, his godhead was still damaged. Not only was his primal qi greatly damaged, but his strength had also plummeted. Even his memories were incomplete and damaged. Even if Ji Tianqing refined his godhead, he didn't know how much of his soul memories he could obtain. Under such circumstances, whether he could obtain key secrets and information would depend on his luck. A black pagoda hovered in a cave in the belly of a mountain. Ji Tianxing entered the divine pagoda and circulated his energy to refine the godhead in the distorted space-time. Only 2 hours had passed in the outside world, but he had spent 4 days in the distorted space-time. These 4 days were enough for him to refine the Lien heir's godhead and strip the memories from his soul. Ji Tianxing was pleasantly surprised by the results. At the same time, he felt slightly depressed and regretful. This was because Ji Tianxing had obtained many of Prince Lien's secrets from the Lien heir's memories. This included Prince Lien's background, experience, inner thoughts and goals, as well as what he had done over the years. He was very clear about it all. Ji Tianxing even knew the thoughts of the Great Yin Emperor and the Great Yin Prince, as well as many secrets of the Great Yin Empire. What interested him the most was that there was a very important thing in Lien heir's memory. 9 years ago, a faction in the Great Yin Empire discovered a mystic realm within the empire's borders. Those experts accidentally entered the secret realm and discovered a divine palace. It seemed to be the cave dwelling of a god-king expert. The experts were so excited that they rushed into the cavern with hearts full of excitement. They had thought that it would be a great opportunity. They would be able to obtain a king-grade divine artifact and the inheritance of a god-king. But they did not expect that what awaited them was danger and death. They had triggered a king-grade divine formation outside the cave, and 3 of them had been killed on the spot. Only 2 of them survived, and they fled the secret realm in a panic. After the news spread, many top forces swarmed over, trying all kinds of ways to break the cave mansion's formation. However, any random king-grade divine formation around the cavern would take those forces a few months, or even a year or 2, to break through. The matter became more and more intense, and gradually, more top forces found out about it. Even the royal family of the Great Yin Empire knew about this. Hence, the Great Yin Emperor sent many experts and the Imperial Guard to occupy the mystic realm. Great Yin's emperor's intention was clear. He wanted to monopolize the mystic realm. This incurred the displeasure of many factions. Dozens of top forces joined forces to resist the Great Yin imperial family. In the face of king-grade divine artifacts, techniques, secret techniques, and inheritances, all the participants were envious. They swore to reap the benefits. To maintain the stability of the empire, the Great Yin Emperor had no choice but to compromise. In the end, the 50 factions came to a consensus and formed an alliance to keep this a secret. They would explore the mystic realm together. As for how to split the loot after the cave abode was opened, the various factions had different opinions. Fortunately, there were too many divine formations in the cave abode. They could not break through them in a short time. Hence, the 50 factions patiently explored and broke through the divine formations bit by bit. Now that 9 years had passed, they had made great progress in their exploration of the God King's cave abode. At the very least, they had figured out one thing. It was indeed a God King's cave abode. It was called the Green Jade Divine Palace. It should be the Green Jade Divine King's residence. At the mention of the Green Jade Divine King, the story from 10,000 years ago had to be brought up. 10,000 years ago, the Green Jade Divine King walked out of the Great Yin Empire and rose to prominence. His name was known throughout the northern region. First published on the Chinese website. Although the Green Jade Divine King had vanished thousands of years ago, his whereabouts were unknown. However, there was evidence that the Green Jade Divine King had lived in the Great Yin Empire for at least 3,000 years. One could imagine that the Green Jade Divine King had lived in the cave abode for 3,000 years. Who knew how many divine items, treasures, and cultivation insights he had left behind? If any divine lord could obtain the Green Jade Divine King's inheritance, cultivation insights, and divine artifacts, it would be a great opportunity. Not only would they have a chance to become a legendary God King, but their combat strength would also increase exponentially. In any case, after confirming the owner of the cave abode, the 50 factions became even more frenzied. The Heavenly Unity sect behind Prince Lien was, naturally, one of the 50 factions. They wanted a share of the loot in the future. Prince Lien had been active in the Fiery Flame and Blood Flame divine nations. However, his heart was always on the Green Jade Divine Palace. Once the Green Jade Divine Palace opened and the 50 factions wanted to enter, he would put everything aside and rush to the Green Jade Divine Palace. After all, it was his greatest opportunity and hope to become a God King. If he could obtain the Green Jade Divine King's inheritance, cultivation insights, divine artifacts, and divine abilities, he would have a chance to become a God King. Once he became a peerless God King, he would be able to seek revenge on the great Yin Emperor for killing his mother and seize the throne. Then, he would deal with Ji Tianxing, and he would be able to easily kill him and take revenge. After learning this secret, Ji Tianxing was in a good mood. He smiled playfully. You want to enter a God King's palace and obtain his inheritance and King Grade divine artifact? Prince Lien, oh Prince Lien, I'm afraid you won't have a chance in this lifetime. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. Suddenly, he muttered the Green Jade Divine King's name and frowned in confusion. Green Jade Divine King? Where have I heard this name before? Ji Tianxing thought about it seriously for a long time and finally had an impression of it. I remember now. In my past life, I came to the Boundless Heaven continent to look for Crimson Sun Divine Gold to improve the quality of the burial of Heaven's Sword. I met this person in the Raging Flame Sea area and even fought with him because of a misunderstanding. This person was also a God King who cultivated the Sword Dao and created 2 Sword Dao divine abilities. But he was completely defeated by me in one move. Ji Tianxing's memories immediately became clear. He remembered that when he met the Green Jade Divine King back then, he had exchanged 3 moves with him. Each time, the Green Jade Divine King's sword move was easily broken by him. At that time, the Green Jade Divine King was at the 3rd Firmament Realm and was traveling the Boundless Heaven continent, pursuing higher divine Dao realms and Sword Dao profundities. Meanwhile, he had just broken through to the God King realm not long ago and was still at the 1st Firmament Divine King realm. But he defeated the Green Jade Divine King very easily. It was precisely because of this that the Green Jade Divine King was very shocked and also felt reverence and admiration for him. Not only did the 2 of them not become enemies, the Green Jade Divine King even apologized to him and sincerely asked for guidance on Sword Dao profundities. At that time, Kenshin saw the Green Jade Divine King's sincere attitude and casually gave him a few pointers. In the end, the words woke him up. The Green Jade Divine King came to a realization and bowed and thanked him excitedly. Chapter 3172. Kenshin and God King Azure Jade's interactions were limited to this. After the misunderstanding was resolved, Kenshin enlightened God King Azure Jade, making God King Azure Jade shed tears of gratitude. Kenshin back then had a slightly cold and aloof personality. He did not exchange pleasantries with God King Azure Jade and left straight away. God King Azure Jade also maintained his poise and did not chase after. He stood where he was and bowed, sending Kenshin off respectfully. This was just a trivial matter to Kenshin. It had happened countless times in his life and would not take it to heart at all. But to God King Azure Jade, it should be a major event worth remembering. After all, he had received Kenshin's enlightenment and had an epiphany on the spot. His Sword Dao cultivation and strength realm would definitely increase. After the reminiscing ended, Ji Tianxing sighed with a complicated expression. Sigh. In a blink of an eye, more than 1,000 years have passed. I've already reincarnated as a person and changed my appearance. An ordinary God King that I once met by chance is now going to cross paths again. Fate is really strange. Without a doubt, when he learned of the Azure Jade Palace's existence, he decided to head there. To the present him, a God King expert's cave abode was also extremely attractive. He was not interested in God King Azure Jade's cultivation experience and insights, nor did he want to learn. At most, it was just for reference. After all, God King Azure Jade's talent, perception, and strength were all inferior to his former self. What truly interested him was the divine pills, divine artifacts, treasures, and materials that might exist in the Azure Jade Palace. The pills, divine artifacts, and materials collected by God King Expert would definitely be King Grade. And what Ji Tianxing lacked the most now was King Gray divine items. If he could obtain some God King level refining materials, then he would be able to start upgrading the Sword of Burial of Heaven very soon. Once the Sword of Burial of Heaven recovered to God King level, its power would be even more terrifying. Furthermore, the Azure Jade Palace was protected by layers of divine arrays, all king-grade divine arrays. The Great Yin Empire's 50 top factions explored and studied for 9 years, but could not see the palace's entrance. But Ji Tianxing did not have such concerns. With his array Dao's strength, vision, and experience, cracking it was absolutely easy. However, now is not the time to go to the Green Jade Palace. Moreover, he did not know the exact location of the secret realm. The most important thing right now was to take care of Prince Lian. Ji Tianxing did not waste any time. He immediately ended his cultivation and left the distorted space-time. He returned to the cave, put away the 9 heavens, 10 absolutes pagoda, and flew toward the south. Along the way, he flew over towering mountains and steep ridges. Not far away, he saw endless ruins and deep pits. It was caused by the self-detonation of several high-level divine lords. Even now, dust was still flying everywhere, and smoke and dust filled the air. Ji Tianxing probed with his divine sense, and saw a large number of armored and black-clothed experts searching around the ruins. He didn't even need to think to know that those people must be Prince Lian and the King of Raging Flames men. His decisive battle with an army of 13,000 had caused such a huge commotion that the entire Raging Flame royal city was alarmed. It would be strange if the King of Raging Flame and Prince Lian did not send someone to check on the situation. Ji Tianxing increased his speed. Like a stream of light cutting through the night sky, he headed straight for the Raging Flame royal city. While hurrying, he was still thinking in his heart, I hope Prince Lian still has some hope in his heart and did not leave the royal city. As long as he is still in the royal city, tonight will be the day of his death. It was already early in the morning, and there were still 4 hours before daybreak. To Ji Tianxing, time was enough. As long as Prince Lian was still in the royal city, he would definitely die before daybreak. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing flew for 180,000 miles and arrived outside the Raging Flame royal city. Under the pitch-black curtain of night, the Raging Flame royal city sat quietly on the grassland. This majestic city that had existed for 10,000 years was neatly built. It occupied an area of 500 miles and could accommodate millions of people. The main city walls around the city were made of black stone that was hundreds of meters tall. While it was solemn and dignified, its defensive power was also very strong. Although the city walls have been repaired several times in the past 10,000 years. However, the most recent renovation was 1,000 years ago. The strip-shaped boulders that built the city walls were covered with moss, as well as cracks and marks etched by wind and frost. In each of the 4 directions of the royal city, there was a huge city gate that was 800 meters tall. It could allow 12 carriages to enter and exit at the same time. It was incomparably spacious. It was late at night, and the north gate was tightly shut. There were hundreds of city guards stationed under the gate, all of them armed with swords and sabers, waiting in formation. If it was in the past, the royal city would have been quiet and peaceful by now, and the lights would have been much sparser. But tonight, the entire royal city was brightly lit, and hundreds of thousands of people were still moving around outside. Countless God Race members gathered together in the streets and alleys, whispering to each other. Even a number of city guards patrolling had increased several times. There were also many mysterious black-clothed people coming and going in and out of the royal city, seeming to be in a hurry. An iron-blooded and solemn atmosphere shrouded the entire royal city, and it also made the people somewhat worried. Many people were guessing whether a great enemy had come to invade. Was the royal city about to be attacked? Ji Tianxing stood outside the north gate, hiding in the clouds, looking down at the royal city of Raging Flame, quietly observing. The 4 great city defense arrays protecting the royal city had been activated, covering the north, south, east, and west respectively. No matter where Ji Tianxing sneaked into the royal city, he had to break one of the great city defense arrays. Otherwise, he could only go through the 4 city gates and be interrogated by the city guards. Or he could directly force his way through the city gates and kill everyone in his way. In that case, he would alert the king of Raging Flame and Prince Lien before he could get close to the palace. After thinking about it, Ji Tianxing still decided to quietly break the great city defense arrays. The north gate was heavily guarded. Not only were there many city guards patrolling, but there was also a large number of imperial guards lying in ambush. Furthermore, there were more than a dozen divine lords hiding in many houses and buildings not far from the city gate. This was obviously to prevent Ji Tianxing from coming from the north and forcing his way through the north gate. In order not to alert the enemy, Ji Tianxing quietly went to the south gate. He had already used the Divine Eye secret technique to observe and could clearly see the defensive power of the 4 city gates. In comparison, the south gate seemed to be heavily guarded on the surface, with a large number of city guards and imperial guards. But in reality, the south gate's defensive power was the weakest. Choosing to sneak into the royal city from there was, of course, the safest choice. Ji Tianxing flew to the south side of the city wall and quietly burrowed into the ground. After moving 100 feet underground, he was blocked by the 5-colored light shield. So, he used the Divine Eye secret technique to carefully observe the great city defense array. This array had a radius of 100 miles, and it was a supreme monarch-level divine array. Its structure was quite complicated, and its defensive power was also very strong. Ji Tianxing could guess that it was most likely set up by many high-level divine lords. Also, it had to be strengthened and reinforced for many years to have such power. However, to Ji Tianxing, this was not a difficult task. Chapter 3173. After a mere 15 minutes, Ji Tianxing saw through the structure of the city protecting Grand Array. He accurately found the weak point of the Grand Array and started casting his art to crack this flaw. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He kneaded divine seals with both hands, releasing hundreds, thousands of divine powers, firing into a certain node of the 5-colored light barrier. Time passed quietly. Half an hour passed very quickly. When Ji Tianxing struck out more than 18,000 strands of divine power, the node collapsed. A fist-sized hole appeared on the resplendent 5-colored light barrier, and it rapidly expanded and enlarged. In a short 2 breaths, that hole became the size of a water vat, enough for Ji Tianxing to pass through. Swoosh! He passed through the hole without hesitation, crossing over the city protecting Grand Array, and entered the capital. And at this time, something that he did not expect happened. Below the South City Gate, among the 300-plus city guards, someone suddenly let out a cry of surprise. Damn it! Someone is cracking the Grand Array underground, attempting to sneak into the capital. Hurry! Everyone, follow this lord. The person who let out the cry of surprise was a middle-aged man wearing standard armor, his looks unassuming. This person's attire was the same as ordinary city guards, inconspicuous in the crowd. Furthermore, he even wore a mysterious circular jade pendant, suppressing his aura fully, stabilizing around 7th-level celestial deity realm. But in reality, his true strength reached 7th-level celestial deity realm, high-ranked divine lord. Swoosh! At the same time that this middle-aged man cried out in surprise, he tunneled underground without hesitation, pouncing toward Ji Tianxing. The 300-plus city guard were stunned for a moment. Then they also dived underground under the lead of several captains. Previously, Ji Tianxing used divine sense to sweep across the city guards below the South City Gate. It was just a rough observation, and he did not take it to heart, because he knew that the city guards below the gate were all decorations. The ones with real combat strength were the Imperial Guards lying in ambush inside the city gate. But he never would have thought that there was actually a high-rank divine lord disguised as an ordinary city guard, and even relied on a divine artifact to suppress his aura, hiding in the crowd. A tiny mistake caused his whereabouts to be exposed, alarming the city guards. Under the lead of the middle-aged Sir God, the 300 city guards quickly arrived near Ji Tianxing. Without saying a word, everyone pulled out their swords and sabers and launched a siege with no regard for their own safety. On the other side, the 500 Imperial Army soldiers lying in ambush at the southern city gate also received the news and signal. Knowing that there were intruders, they all pulled out their swords and sabers and were on high alert. Soon, a great battle broke out underground. More than 300 city guards unleashed all kinds of divine powers and ultimate skills, unleashing a torrent of divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, blasting toward Tianxing. The soil and rocks below the ground had been blown to smithereens by the divine light and shadow, revealing enormous faults and loopholes. In the face of this sudden situation, Tianxing was not worried. He was just a little surprised. There's actually a high divine lord disguised as an ordinary city guard and waited for me at the southern city gate. He didn't know if it was Prince Lian's arrangement or the King of Raging Flames' decree. If this was arranged by the ruler of the Kingdom of Raging Flames, then he was a schemer who could not be underestimated. After all, this person had already guessed this lord's thoughts and actually knew how to do the opposite. With this thought in mind, Tianxing waved his hands and decisively unleashed a sky full of sword glows to resist the siege of the city guards. Bam! 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 Boom! 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 With a deafening explosion, the sky full of sword glows clashed with the divine light and shadow, creating a terrifying shockwave. More than 100 city guards were killed on the spot by the shockwave, turning into a bloody mist and dregs. There were still more than 200 sword glows that had not shattered. They were still as sharp as ever as they charged toward the 100 or so survivors. The shockwave spread out and caused the ground to collapse for dozens of miles. The entire royal city shook violently as if a great earthquake had occurred. Even the city walls near the southern city gate had caved in a little. As a result, more than half of the royal city was alarmed. Those commoners who were still on the streets, discussing the shockwave of the self-detonation, instantly paled and let out worried cries. Heavens, we were right. There is indeed a strong enemy invading the royal city, and they are already fighting. I felt it just now. The shockwave came from underground. The strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city from underground. If the strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city silently, that would be the most dangerous. Luckily, the city guards and the imperial guards were more responsible and managed to find the enemy. The shockwave came from near the southern city gate. Everyone stay as far away as possible to avoid being implicated. All kinds of exclamations and discussions exploded in the royal city and gathered into a torrent of sound waves. But very quickly, the dull sound waves were drowned out by the loud explosion coming from underground. It turned out that it was the 7th degree realm Sir God who had launched an all-out attack on Tianxing. The two of them exchanged a blow, but Tianxing was not injured at all and did not yield an inch. As for the middle-aged man, he was sent flying backward while vomiting blood. Both of his legs had been minced by the sword glows. Suffering such a heavy injury, the middle-aged man fell into the ruins and gave out a heart-wrenching scream. The 100 over city guards who were lucky enough to survive instantly revealed a horrified expression when they saw their second commander was not able to take one blow from the other party and was seriously injured. But it was too late for them to escape. Hundreds of dazzling golden sword glows, carrying a shapeless sword intent which could kill everything, enveloped everyone. Following the explosion of Bam Bam Bam, those 100 over city guards were turned into dregs by the sword glows. Only that middle-aged man was left alive as he struggled to climb out of the ruins. He wanted to continue fighting, but he happened to see Tianxing killing 100 over city guards in seconds. Seeing this scene, the middle-aged man was horrified. He knew that he wasn't Tianxing's match, so he tried his best to escape. As he escaped into the royal city, he didn't forget to send out a signal for help and a warning. Tianxing's plan had been spoiled, and he hated that middle-aged man very much. His face was gloomy as he chased after him with murderous eyes. In just 2 short breaths, he caught up with the middle-aged man and released 3 extremely violent sword glows, turning him into dregs. Even the middle-aged man's godhead was blasted into pieces. The power of the three dazzling golden swords did not diminish. They traversed dozens of miles and gradually dissipated into the depths of the ground. Ji Tianxing put away the godhead fragments, entered stealth mode, and left the underground. Swoosh! With a flash of light, he avoided the city guards near the city gate and appeared in a house in the South City district. At the same time, his divine sense enveloped the entire royal city and saw everything in the royal city clearly. All the people in the city ran in panic and hid in their own residences. And within the royal palace, a large number of city guards and palace experts rushed out and rushed over at an extremely fast speed. Even the Sir God experts guarding the other three city gates quickly rushed over to provide support. Ji Tianxing was quite surprised by the speed of the other party's reaction. However, he maintained stealth mode and concealed his aura, successfully hiding from everyone's detection. He swaggered out of the house and flew across the night sky at a moderate speed towards the brightly lit royal palace. Chapter 3174. As Ji Tianxing flew toward the palace, many imperial guards and experts rushed toward him from all directions. There were at least 30 groups and more than 1,000 people. They all looked hurried and murderous. However, these people brushed past Ji Tianxing and did not notice him. When they arrived near the south gate, they naturally did not find him. They hurriedly searched around. At this time, Ji Tianxing had arrived at the side of the palace. The palace was located in the middle of the city. It covered an area of 50 square miles and was like a small city. The palace walls, which were hundreds of feet high, were lined with imperial guards in armor and holding swords. They were ready for battle. Within the palace walls, there were hundreds of splendid palaces and buildings, all of which were lit up with dazzling lights. Shadows of people could be seen everywhere. Tonight, the palace were destined to be chaotic. Not only were the imperial guards on high alert, but even the attendants and servants in the palace were also in a defensive posture. Obviously, the king of Raging Flame had already given the order and reminded the people in the palace. He had already guessed that Ji Tianxing would sneak into the palace to take revenge. Therefore, the entire palace was in a state of nervousness. What gave Ji Tianxing a headache was that the palace also had 2 layers of defensive divine arrays, and they were fully activated. The 2 defensive divine arrays were not big. They only covered an area of 50 square miles, which was just enough to cover the entire palace. The defensive divine array of the palace was also of supreme monarch level. However, compared to the 4 defensive divine arrays, it was more sophisticated and complex. Its defensive power was also more powerful. Ji Tianxing hid in the dark and used the secret technique of God's eye to observe for half an hour before he found a flaw. It took him another hour to break through the 2 defensive divine formations one after the other. He passed through the hole in the colorful light shield and successfully sneaked into the palace. However, just as he appeared outside a majestic palace, a bright divine light shone above his head. More than a dozen divine light shadows bombarded him. At the same time, a few deep and majestic roars sounded in the night sky. The thief is here. Come and surround him. Found him. He's here. Come and help. Quick, surround him. We can't let him escape. Very clearly, when Ji Tianxing was cracking the defensive divine array, he was discovered by a divine lord powerhouse. In the night sky, 10,000 feet in front of him, there were 3 high divine lords. They were all imperial consecrators under the monarch's command. Other than the 3 of them, there were more than a dozen consecrators in the palace. Normally, these consecrators lived like princes and cultivated in seclusion, not showing themselves easily. Now that it was a critical moment, all the consecrators had been awakened to protect the safety of the palace. Each of them led a group of elite imperial guards to guard every direction of the palace. Coincidentally, the 3 inner palace consecrators were nearby and discovered Ji Tianxing, who was breaking the divine formation. The 3 of them attacked without any hesitation. At the same time, they called for reinforcements from the inner palace and the imperial army. Soon, dozens of saber lights and sword shadows arrived in front of Ji Tianxing and engulfed his figure. Ji Tianxing wasn't worried at all. He swung the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, sending out 9 dazzling sword lights. Bang! Bang, bang, bang. The sacred giant sword clashed with the saber lights and sword shadows, creating a deafening sound. In a blink, the divine powers of the 3 inner palace consecrators were shattered by the sword lights. Not only that, the 9 giant swords didn't lose their power. They attacked the 3 consecrators separately. The 3 consecrators were shocked. Their expressions changed immediately. They hurriedly performed their ultimate skills to block the attack with all their strength. After another series of muffled sounds, the 3 inner palace consecrators were knocked back and fell into 2 palaces with blood spurting out of their mouths. The defensive divine formations of the 2 palaces were also smashed until divine light flashed chaotically and cracks appeared on them. Ji Tianxing wanted to take advantage of the situation and quickly kill the 3 injured inner palace consecrators. However, another 4 consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army hurried to the scene. Everyone's gazes and divine senses locked onto Ji Tianxing and attacked him without hesitation. Suddenly, deafening battle cries burst out, and the dazzling light of divine spells lit up, and the area became chaotic. Ji Tianxing was besieged and had to give up on killing the 3 inner palace consecrators. He turned to fend off the 1,000 imperial army. Infinite sky of chaos. In order to save time and divine power, he used his divine powers and his body became transparent. All of a sudden, the overwhelming saber light and sword shadows pierced through his body and scattered on the ground. Most of the divine powers dissipated and their power was absorbed by the world. A small portion of the divine art light shadows blasted into a palace with a radius of 100 feet, instantly turning it into ruins. Ji Tianxing was unharmed and took the opportunity to wave the burial of heaven. Sword light filled the sky. Sword of the breaking sun. God-killing sword. Sword light poured down from the sky and drowned the 4 inner palace consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. Suddenly, blood and flesh splattered under the sword light. Screams rose and fell. The elite imperial army soldiers could not withstand a single blow from the sword light. They were as fragile as paper. After a burst of violent sword light flashed, more than 800 imperial guards were killed and turned into blood mist and dregs. Even the 4 inner palace consecrators were seriously injured by the god-killing sword. Some of them lost limbs, and some were even cut in half at the waist. Such a shocking scene caused a few of the inner palace consecrators and the surviving imperial guards to reveal expressions of fear and let out terrified cries. The 3 consecrators who were seriously injured wanted to help. Seeing this scene, the 3 of them stopped their charge and pretended to be physically exhausted as they retreated to the side. They hurriedly circulated their qi to suppress their injuries. Seeing that the surroundings had fallen into silence, the situation was a little awkward. More than 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 inner palace consecrators did not dare to attack. Fortunately, 2 more inner palace consecrators and a commander of the imperial army arrived with more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. This group of people came aggressively with murderous intent. They roared and charged, releasing divine light that covered the sky and drowning Ji Tianxing. Seeing this, the 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 consecrators were slightly relieved. They quickly surrounded and attacked. Since they had more people, they should have a chance to kill him. Taking a step back, even if they could not kill him, they should be safe. However, they soon realized that they were wrong. They had underestimated Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength. Sword come. Ji Tianxing saw that more and more people were coming, so he used his ultimate killing move. Since he had already snuck into the palace and exposed himself, he had no qualms about killing. He pointed his right hand at the sky and gathered the power of the stars to form 25,000 divine giant swords. They poured down like a meteor shower. In an instant, the dazzling meteor shower enveloped the entire imperial city. The night sky within a 10,000-mile radius was as bright as day. Countless divine giant swords poured down, focusing on the palace within a 50,000-mile radius. As a result, The divine giant swords in this area were as dense as raindrops. Chapter 31:75. Boom, boom, boom. There was a series of loud noises. The entire palace was engulfed by the huge divine swords. It was a colorful scene. More than 1,000 Imperial guards, 9 Imperial consecrators, and 1 Imperial Guard commander who had besieged Ji Tianxing were killed on the spot. With Ji Tianxing as the center, the area within a radius of 10,000 feet was a deep pit. All the houses and buildings were reduced to dust, and everyone was blasted into pieces. In just an instant, more than 3,000 people died within the area of 30,000 meters. The other 1,000 people were the royal family members, servants, and guard from the various palaces and residences. Of course, the heaven punishment sword formation covered the entire palace, and the number of casualties was much more than that. The 4 city protection arrays and the 2 defense divine arrays of the palace only lasted for about 10 breaths under the attack of the 10,000 swords before they were smashed into pieces. When the defense array collapsed, the entire palace was exposed to the sword formation and was at the mercy of the sword formation. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing deliberately controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. There were 10,000 huge swords around the palace to form a sword net to seal off the area within a radius of 1,000 miles. The other 15,000 giant swords were basically gathered above the palace. Therefore, there were no casualties among the commoners and deities in the palace. On the other hand, the situation in the palace was too horrible to look at. In just 20 breaths, more than 5,000 Imperial guards, more than 10,000 royal family members, servants, and guards were killed by the 10,000 swords. Nearly 80% of the palaces and residences were destroyed by the sword radiance. Not even the broken walls were left. Under the attack of the 10,000 swords, not to mention the enlightened masters, even the lower and middle Sir gods could not hold on for long before they were killed. As a result, the palace was completely destroyed. 80% of the buildings were destroyed. There were only 20 or so palaces full of cracks that were on the verge of collapse. There were more than 50,000 people in the palace, including 20,000 Imperial guards, 20,000 servants and guards. The remaining 10,000 people were the royal family members, Imperial consecrators, and deity nation officials. However, after the heaven punishment sword formation operated for 30 breaths, more than 80% of the people in the palace were killed. Only about 10,000 people were still alive. However, most of them were seriously injured and covered in blood. Of course, those who could survive were basically experts, powerhouses, or people of noble status who were protected by many powerhouses. The 40,000 people who were killed were basically the Imperial guards, servants, and guards. There were also some members of the royal family. Ji Tianxing didn't do anything. He just stood in the night sky and stared expressionlessly at the majestic temple in the middle of the palace. Secretly, he controlled the operation of the heaven-destroying sword formation and controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. That magnificent temple was the main hall of the royal palace, the most solemn and dignified place. Usually, the ruler of the Raging Flame country stayed there for a long period of time, discussing court matters with the civil and military officials. It was also in that temple. After the sword formation operated for 40 breaths, 95% of the buildings had disappeared, turning into dust and debris. The temple's defense had also completely collapsed. It was smashed into pieces by the tens of thousands of swords and collapsed into ruins. Only then did a few balls of dazzling divine light fly out from the ruins. Shwa, shwa. A total of 9 balls of divine light enveloped more than 3,000 members of the divine clan and flew into the night sky. The 9 balls of divine light were unusually strong. Some of them were formed by many defensive artifacts, while others were formed by many powerhouses working together to form a shield. The 3,000 members of the divine clan within the light shield were basically members of the royal family, important officials, and experts of the palace. Under the control of many powerhouses, the 9 balls of divine light flew through the rain of swords and toward Ji Tianxing. While they were still tens of thousands of feet away, a middle-aged man's angry roar came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront. Tianxing, stop. The middle-aged man's voice was heavy and majestic, with a tinge of desolation, anxiety, and anger. Tianxing ignored him and continued to operate the heaven-destroying sword formation expressionlessly. He continued to kill the rest of the people in the palace. After a few breaths, the 9 balls of divine light were even closer to him and stopped 10,000 feet away. At this time, the heaven-destroying sword formation had killed thousands of imperial guards, royal family members, servants, and guards. At this point, more than 50,000 people in the palace were almost all dead. Those who were still alive were only the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. Of course, Tianxing also understood that those 3,000 people were the most respected and powerful people in the palace. Given another 10 breaths of time, he could operate the heaven-destroying sword formation to destroy the 9 balls of divine light and kill all 3,000 people. However, the middle-aged man's angry voice came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront again. Tianxing, you have already won. I admit defeat. Why do you have to kill all of us? There was no doubt that the middle-aged man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious crown was the king of the country of furious flames, Xue Chang'e. He was tall, had long arms, a square face, and a broad forehead. He had the appearance of a king, with thick eyebrows and big eyes. However, at this moment, he did not have any of his former majesty and loftiness. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was sorrowful. His eyes were dim. He had no choice. The palace that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years was destroyed in his generation. The royal family had lasted for tens of thousands of years and had given birth to thousands of bloodline descendants. Now, more than half of them were dead. After suffering such a heavy blow, if he could still remain calm, he would not have been subdued by Prince Lian. Tianxing used his divine thoughts to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and temporarily stopped the attack. Suddenly, 15,000 giant swords floated in the night sky. The tips of the swords were pointed at the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. The formless sword intent suppressed everything and was incomparably violent. The pressure on the 3,000 people increased sharply. Their faces were pale, and their hearts were filled with fear. Tianxing looked at Xue Chang'e expressionlessly. After sizing him up, he said, "You are the king of the country of raging flames?" Xue Chang'e nodded and said in a heavy tone, "That's right, I am." Tianxing said again, "I think you know why I am here." Xue Chang'e was very tactful. He nodded again and said, "Of course I know. You are here for Prince Lian and me." Tianxing frowned and was about to correct him. Xue Chang'e sighed and bowed deeply. He said in a sincere tone, "Young Master Tianxing, I have heard of your reputation and deeds not long after you stepped into the kingdom of raging flames. Your strength is strong, and your methods are ruthless. This monarch has never seen anyone like you before. Tonight's battle on Heavenly Dragon Mountain reached the peak and created a miracle. After tonight, your name will spread throughout the great Yin Empire and shock the world. Now that things have come to this, I have already suffered a crushing defeat. I don't want to say anything more. I only ask that young Master Tianxing be magnanimous and let these 3,000 people and the millions of people in the royal city go. No matter what, it's all my fault. I hope you don't implicate the innocent. You are the soaring dragon of the 9 heavens, the divine king's choice. You should have the bearing of a peerless powerhouse. You should not make things difficult for them. To show my sincerity, I am willing to commit suicide on the spot. I hope that young Master Tianxing can fulfill my wish." Chapter 3176. Xue Chang'e and Prince Lian had completely different styles of doing things. He wasn't as cunning and scheming as Prince Lian. In comparison, he was more honest, steady, and a man of his word. Of course, this was the basic quality of a monarch. But overall, Xue Chang'e was much more honest and straightforward. After speaking, he formed a seal with both hands and began to accumulate divine power into the Godhead in his mind. As long as Tianxing agreed and allowed him to commit suicide on the spot, Sparing more than 3,000 royal family members and millions of citizens, he would shatter the godhead without hesitation. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing raised an eyebrow and asked, "How did a man of your temperament become Prince Lian's fan?" Xue Chang'e was startled, then calmly said, "I know you have a blood feud with the young prince, so you must be prejudiced against him. Perhaps in your eyes, the young prince is a scheming, sinister, and ruthless person. But to me, the young prince is my benefactor. Even if I repay him with my life, it won't be enough. If it weren't for little prince's help back then, with this monarch's shrewdness and conduct, how could this monarch have survived the struggle for the throne? How could I have become the monarch of divine nation? Back then, the young prince saved my life and helped me ascend to the throne. Now, even if I die, I can't repay his kindness." Ji Tianqing had heard about the matter between Xue Chang'e and Prince Lian from Ye Feiyan. He also learned about 70 to 80% of it from Lian Heir's soul memories. He didn't want to hear more from Xue Chang'e, so he said in a low voice, "Xue Chang'e, there's no enmity between us. It's only because you work for Prince Lian that I have to deal with you. But now I'll give you a chance. You don't have to commit suicide. As long as you hand over Prince Lian or tell me where he's hiding, I'll let you go. The members of the royal family around you, as well as the millions of civilians in the royal city, will be spared from death." The 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light immediately revealed expressions of joy, anticipation, and excitement. Their despairing hearts were also illuminated by the light of dawn. Everyone looked at Xue Chang'e, full of hope that he would agree. However, Xue Chang'e's body shook, and his expression became rather unsightly, especially when he saw the eyes of the people around him become bright and passionate. His expression became even more gloomy. "No." Xue Chang'e's tone was firm as he coldly shouted and righteously said, "Bin Jun just said that even if I die, it will be difficult to repay little prince's kindness. How can I betray him?" Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and sneered. "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. This is not integrity, this is blind loyalty. Since you are not willing to betray Grand Prince Lian, then I will kill you and everyone else, and then destroy the entire royal city." After he finished speaking, he used his divine telekinesis to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and sped it up. The 15,000 giant swords floating above everyone's head shone with a brilliant brilliance, releasing an incomparably violent sword intent that would pour down at any moment. The 3,000 people in the 9 clusters of godly light were in a life and death situation. Their faces were pale, and their hearts were filled with fear and despair. Many people couldn't bear the enormous pressure and were also afraid of the threat of death. They all opened their mouths to beg for mercy and persuade Xue Chang'e. "Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, now is not the time to let your emotions affect your decisions. Your Majesty, please think about the royal family and the officials. If everyone dies here, the God Nation's foundation will be destroyed. Your Majesty, even if you don't care about our lives, please spare everyone's lives for the sake of the millions of people in Royal City. Those millions of innocent people were innocent. How can you be so stubborn and cause everyone's deaths?" Instantly, many officials of the God Nation began to persuade the king. Some of the royal family members with higher statuses even spoke harshly and reprimanded the king for being insensitive. Xue Chang'e's situation became extremely awkward. He had become the enemy of many royal family members and officials. Everyone blamed him for the deaths of their own people and the deaths of millions of people. This was human nature. Xue Chang'e wanted to be loyal and righteous, but everyone only wanted to live. Who would be willing to let their emotions affect their decisions? Ji Tianqing made it clear that as long as Xue Chang'e revealed Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, he would spare everyone's lives. But Xue Chang'e didn't agree. He would rather die than betray Grand Prince Lian. No one blamed Ji Tianqing. They could only blame Xue Chang'e for being cold-blooded and heartless. Everyone became agitated and gradually turned from persuasion to crying, reprimanding, and begging. It was as if Xue Chang'e he wanted to kill everyone, including the millions of people in Royal City. Xuechang, he was so angry that his whole body trembled. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His qi and blood surged, and he spat out a mouthful of old blood. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said, "I admire your integrity and honesty, but I despise your foolish loyalty. If you don't even know how to choose, you don't deserve to be the king of the raging flame divine nation. Reveal Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, or implicate millions of people to die with you. Choose for yourself." No matter what, it was time to make a choice. Xuechang, he couldn't avoid it. He endured unparalleled psychological pressure and slowly turned to look at the 9 balls of divine light. His gaze swept over the 3,000 royal family members. From everyone's expression and eyes, he saw the desire and urgency to survive, as well as anxiety and fear. Among them were his concubines and children, as well as his brothers, nephews, trusted ministers, and so on. In the face of death, everyone chose to plead and persuade him. After all, he owed Grand Prince Lian a favor, but they didn't. But everyone's life and death were now in his hands. After a long time, Xuechang, he looked around and slowly retracted his gaze. He turned around, and his expression became dejected and helpless, as if he had aged a few decades in an instant. He smiled bitterly and lowered his head. He didn't look at Ji Tianxing's expression and said bitterly, forget it. Since I'm the king of the divine nation, how can I act willfully and willfully? At that time, I'll most likely become a fatuous king condemned by everyone. A ruthless king who doesn't care about the lives of his people. A sinner who caused the destruction of the divine nation. Hearing this, the 3,000 royal family members were obviously relieved. They all revealed expressions of relief. Everyone knew that Xuechang, he couldn't go against the will of the people and could only choose to compromise. As expected, Xuechang Yi's voice was dry as he said, "Young Master Tianxing, I've agreed to your conditions, so please keep your promise." To be honest, when you fought with more than 10,000 soldiers and many divine lords self-destructed, Grand Prince Lian quietly left the royal city. He brought his trusted aides through the teleportation divine formation in the palace and directly arrived at the border of the raging flame county, Furious River City. Calculating the time, he should have already left Furious River City and entered the Rock Magus County in the south. This time, he lost to you, and his forces were almost wiped out. He can no longer establish himself in the raging flame divine nation. Next, he should return to the great Yin Empire to recuperate for a while. As for where he will go, I don't know. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3177. After Xuechang finished speaking, he lowered his head even more. Under the dim divine light, one could vaguely see that his face was dark red and full of shame. His eyes were full of self-mockery and helplessness. It was clear that he didn't want to betray Prince Lian. But he had no choice but to reveal Prince Lian's whereabouts. This made him feel extremely guilty and condemned. To him, this was equivalent to a stain in his life that would be difficult to wash away in his lifetime. The 3,000-plus royal family members didn't care about this. Everyone stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his verdict. Xuechang had already answered. Whether or not everyone could live depended on whether Ji Tianxing was satisfied. Clearly, Ji Tianxing wasn't satisfied. He frowned and asked, "That's it? I'm not surprised that Prince Lian escaped in time. But you one of Prince Lian's most trusted aides. How could you not know where he went? Xuechang, I think you're honest and straightforward. But you hid something and wanted to get away with it?" Seeing that Ji Tianxing was very dissatisfied and angry, the 3,000-plus royal family members' expressions changed. They were so anxious that their foreheads were covered in sweat. Many people started to persuade Xuechang again. There were even some royal family members with higher status and seniority who started to reprimand and complain about Xuechang. Xuechang was under great pressure. His face became more and more unsightly. Seeing that everyone was agitated, he could only explain to Ji Tianxing, "Gongzi Tianxing, I really didn't know about Prince Lian's plan. You also know that Prince Lian is very suspicious and scheming. He's very shrewd. After knowing that the army was defeated, he didn't even wait for the scouts to investigate the situation and left with his trusted aides. Moreover, he didn't even say goodbye to me when he left. I only found out about this after hearing the reports from my subordinates. Seeing that Xue Chang'e didn't seem to be lying, and Ji Tianxing analyzed that Prince Lian would have done so given his nature. Thus, he stopped questioning Xue Chang'e. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll believe you this time. In the future, if this sovereign finds out that you lied to this sovereign, don't blame this sovereign for making another trip to the capital and personally taking your dog life." Xue Chang'e hurriedly shook his head and said, "I dare not deceive young Master Tianxing. If this lord's words are false, I'm at your disposal." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything more. He frowned and thought about where Prince Lian might be hiding. He had refined the memories of Lian Heir's soul, so he knew many of Prince Lian's secrets. At this moment, Xue Chang'e hesitated for a moment and spoke to interrupt his thoughts. "Gongzi Tianxing, I've already followed your request and revealed Prince Lian's whereabouts. Shouldn't you fulfill your promise?" Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts, glanced at him, and said indifferently, "This monarch is a man of his word. I will naturally fulfill my promise." With that, he waved his arm and removed the heaven-destroying sword formation. The 20,000 swords that had been hovering in the night sky and covering Royal City immediately disappeared without a trace. Instantly, Royal City, which had been illuminated by the sword light until it was as bright as day, also became dim. The 3,000 royal family members looked as if they had been pardoned. They revealed expressions of joy as if they had just survived a disaster. The tens of thousands of people in Royal City had been trembling with fear and despair. Now that the sword formation had disappeared, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Countless people cried out in surprise and whispered in each other's ears. Many people saw that the once dazzling palace had been reduced to ruins. Everyone was discussing and guessing what had happened in the royal palace. Who was so powerful that they could destroy the royal palace? Could it be that Tianxing, who had been rumored to be the god of slaughter? At the same time, Xue Chang'e saw that Ji Tianxing was a man of his word and also breathed a sigh of relief. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your mercy." Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "Xue Chang'e, I'll give you a word of advice. Grand Prince Lian opposed this monarch, and he won't live long. You don't have to be blindly loyal to him. You must always remember that you are the monarch of the raging flame divine country. You don't have the right to be willful. You must put the overall situation in the divine country and its hundreds of millions of people before you make any decision. Otherwise, you will destroy the raging flame divine country sooner or later." Xue Chang'e was startled. He didn't expect that Ji Tianxing, who was his enemy, would give him pointers. After frowning and thinking for a moment, he remembered Ji Tianxing's words in his heart and sincerely thanked him. "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your pointers. This monarch will definitely remember it." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else and expressionlessly asked, "Where is the teleportation array leading to the border of Raging Flame County?" Xue Chang'e knew that he was leaving Royal City and was secretly relieved. He hurriedly replied, "It's in the Huayang Divine Palace. That's Grand Prince Lian's residence in Royal City. Many years ago, he had this monarch build that divine array in the Huayang Divine Palace." Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and said in a deep voice, "Damn it. With Grand Prince Lian's way of doing things, he will definitely have that divine array destroyed after he leaves. Quickly take this monarch there." Xue Chang'e also understood his meaning and didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly took him to the Huayang Divine Palace. In just 2 short breaths, the two of them teleported 100 miles away and landed in front of a magnificent palace. The guards and servants around the palace had already fled in all directions, their whereabouts unknown. The two of them directly used an escape technique and entered the underground hall of the Divine Palace. They saw that in the middle of the hall, there was a huge teleportation array that was shining with a dim white light. Dozens of elite heavenly gods were around the teleportation array, working together to destroy it. Seeing Xue Chang'e and Ji Tianxing arrive, those people were stunned and stopped what they were doing. After coming back to their senses, they turned around and fled without hesitation. Ji Tianxing didn't pay attention to those escaping heavenly gods. He didn't even have the interest to chase after them. He used the divine eye mystic art to observe the array and quickly saw the situation. Fortunately, we came in time. These people are weak and only destroyed some insignificant things. While talking, Ji Tianxing started to cast spells to repair the teleportation array. After 15 minutes, the teleportation array was fully repaired. Ji Tianxing stepped into the teleportation array and walked toward the blazing white teleportation door. Before leaving, he threw down a final sentence. Xue Chang'e, you better pray that we don't meet again. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for you. After saying that, he stepped into the teleportation door and disappeared. Xue Chang'e stood on the spot and stared at the light door in a daze. He pondered for a long time before turning around and leaving. When he returned to the palace, more than 3,000 royal family members and ministers were looking at him with burning eyes. Seeing him return alone and not seeing Ji Tianxing's trace, everyone opened their mouths to ask. After knowing that Ji Tianxing had left the royal city through the teleportation array, everyone finally relaxed and erupted into cheers and discussions. Xue Chang'e, however, couldn't feel happy. He looked at the ruined palace with a blank expression and his eyes dimmed. Chapter 3178. Although the lives of Xue Chang'e, the royal family, and the officials were saved, the palace was destroyed. However, the destruction of the palace and the deaths of tens of thousands of imperial guards, servants, and guard were also a huge loss. It would take a long time to rebuild the palace and reorganize the imperial guards, servants, and guards. It would consume a lot of manpower and resources. This was a heavy blow to the raging flame divine kingdom. Just treat it as a punishment for me. Give me an unforgettable lesson. Xue Chang'e sighed and began to issue orders, dispatching the officials and the royal family to prepare to rebuild the palace. The royal family and the officials who had narrowly escaped death were no longer hostile to Xue Chang'e. They happily accepted the orders and went to carry out the mission. Soon, the news spread from the palace and spread throughout the royal city. 2 hours later, at daybreak, all the people in the city knew the whole story. When everyone found out that there was only one person among the thousands of soldiers and strong enemies they had expected, they were all stunned. And when they learned that the person who destroyed the palace and slaughtered tens of thousands of people was Grim Reaper Tianxing, they were even more terrified. Later, another piece of news spread that before Tianxing broke into the royal city, he had fought a decisive battle with more than 10,000 soldiers on Celestial Dragon Mountain. In the end, Tianxing won a complete victory, killing more than 10,000 soldiers and forcing many divine lords to self-detonate. This made the people in the city even more shocked. It was as if they were listening to a heavenly book. This series of news set off a shocking hurricane in the royal city, igniting everyone's enthusiasm. The commoners were suddenly enlightened. No wonder there was a divine light that shot into the sky and covered half of the night sky. More people rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, Grim Reaper Tianxing's target was clear, and he didn't attack the people of the royal city. Otherwise, if that sword array had gone all out, the entire royal city would have been turned into ruins, and all the people would have died. Thus, the people felt more and more reverence for Grim Reaper Tianxing. Many people were thinking about the rumors circulating in the divine kingdom, saying that Tianxing was a villain and a Grim Reaper who killed people like scything flax. It seemed that the rumors weren't true. That Grim Reaper didn't kill the innocent and had the demeanor of a powerhouse. As time passed, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. The news of the battle and the destruction of the royal palace also spread out of the royal city and spread throughout the raging flame divine kingdom. A few days later, this series of news spread out of the raging flame divine nation and spread to the surrounding countries, including the Great Yin Empire. As a result, Ji Tianxing's reputation as the god of slaughter spread far and wide. The people of various countries were discussing his achievements and miracles. When all kinds of news spread out of the Raging Flame Divine Country, Ji Tianqing was also about to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country. That night, he left King City through the teleportation formation and arrived at the border of Raging Flame County, appearing in Raging River City. Prince Lien did not disappoint him. As soon as he stepped out of the teleportation array and appeared on a tall altar, he was besieged by dozens of elites. There were a total of more than 70 people, all of whom had the strength of 8th level celestial deity realm and above. The leaders were 4 lower divine lords. Without a doubt, these people were all Prince Lien's subordinates, and they had been ordered to guard this place. Prince Lien had given them the task of killing anyone who walked out of the divine array. The result was indisputable. Ji Tianqing easily killed more than 70 experts, including the 4 lower divine lords. Then, he left Raging River City before dawn and continued south. The Raging Flame County was located in the center of the Raging Flame Divine Country, and the Rockwitch County was to the south. Further south, he still had to pass through 5 counties to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country and enter the Great Yin Empire. Ji Tianqing calculated the time. If he flew at full speed, it would take him about 20 days to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country. This way, he would definitely not be able to catch up to Prince Lien. Wasting so much time would also give Prince Lien more time to prepare. On the way, he had been pondering and analyzing. Prince Lien was thoroughly defeated in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations, and his subordinate forces were all eradicated by me. Although he had secretly recruited a few forces in the other 2 divine kingdoms and built up a team of forces, the divine kingdom as compared to the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations, his foundation in those 2 divine nations is still shallow. Thus, when he fled the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom, he definitely wouldn't go to those 2 divine kingdoms. His only choice is to escape back to the Great Yin Empire. This was the first step of Ji Tianqing's analysis. It was reasonable and basically the same as what Xue Chang'e had said. Then, Ji Tianqing began to ponder another problem. Prince Lien's injuries should be more or less healed. After many battles, he's already seen my strength and knows that he's no match for me. Therefore, he'll definitely hide and recuperate after escaping back to the Great Yin Empire. He'll only dare to seek revenge after he's accumulated enough strength. Before he's confident enough, he'll definitely hide. But where will he hide? The imperial capital of the Great Yin Empire? Or was it some desolate place with no one around? Or the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect? The imperial capital of the Great Yin Empire was the territory of the Great Yin Emperor. Prince Lien and the Great Yin Emperor had a grudge against each other for killing his mother. Moreover, he had caused a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations. Otherwise, the Great Yin Emperor would definitely find a reason to punish him after seeing his wild ambitions. As for hiding in a desolate place, Ji Tianqing did not think it was likely. Prince Lien was used to being high and mighty. He lived like a prince and could command many experts at any time. If he hid in a desolate place, he would be safe. However, he and his subordinates would be cut off from the outside world. Moreover, the conditions in a desolate place were harsh and not suitable for recuperation. After thinking about it, the most likely place Prince Lien could hide was the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. Prince Lien's biggest backer is the Heavenly Union sect. He'll only be safe and convenient if he hides in the headquarters. Moreover, he might be hoping that I won't dare to look for him because of the Heavenly Union sect's power and prestige. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself as a mocking sneer appeared on his face. Prince Lien, oh, Prince Lien, it's useless even if you hide in the Great Yin Emperor's palace, let alone the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. If I want to kill you, you won't be able to escape death no matter where you run to. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing decided to leave the Raging Flame Divine Nation as soon as possible. Flying was too slow. He planned to look for a teleportation divine formation after entering Rockwitch County. It should save him a lot of time. After entering the Great Yin Empire, he would head to the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. At that time, he would try to kill Prince Lien and end this grudge. He would try his best not to implicate the innocent. If the Heavenly Union sect was tactful and did not interfere in his grudge with Prince Lien, they would be spared. If the Heavenly Union sect interfered, protected Prince Lien, or even attacked him with all their might, he did not mind destroying the Heavenly Union sect